distance to be here today, so I appreciate that. I'm sure people will be trickling in as we go through the presentation. Housekeeping issues. First off, we've been having some power issues today. So our apologies that if the power goes out, we will just restart things. So work with us, be patient, we appreciate you being here. Secondly, restrooms. There's a porta potty out back here. There's a thrift store right next door that has a more accessible restroom in the back. There's plenty of water in the coolers in the back. There's snacks on the table in the back. So feel free to help yourself anytime. So, I was going to have Kim Anderson, who's executive director here, give a little talk, but she's running around dealing with power issues. So, anyways, yeah. So first off, I will introduce Dr. Kim Bradbury, all the way up here from Madison. A state geologist. Former state geologist. He's retired.
But still on the hair.
Yep. In the middle, we have Dr. Oberle.
No applause, just throw money.
What you don't know about Steve is that he has been so generous with his time with us here in St. Clair County, especially around the issue of Emerald Sky and the massive spill that happened a few years ago. He has donated, I can't remember how many hours, phone calls to the governor, to the DOJ, to the EPA. I mean, he has knocked on every door for us. So thank this guy later when you talk to him. All right. Lastly, Kara Dunn from Wisconsin Farmers Union. She's here with the underwear display. We'll start with these three. Then we'll have Tim Stieber and Adam. Is Adam here yet?
I'm doing.
You're doing his? Okay. Tim Stieber's from the county. He'll be talking to us about nitrates and the groundwater study update and all that good stuff. Lisa Doerr is here from Doerr County. We'll be talking about township ordinances if you're interested in doing some things to help protect your water. And lastly will be Laurie Diaby filling in for Mary Go today, and she'll be talking about private wells and all kinds of stuff with public health and things to worry about. I already see Kim in the back. Do you want to come say a couple words? No?
Introduce Tim.
She'll come out here and tell you a little bit about the Nature Center here. She's very kind, worked with us. She's been working hard with us. So thank you.
Trying to keep the lights on is what we're trying to do. We just got power in this building about a month ago, and we've had hunter safety education in here about 5 nights, and no problem. And then all of a sudden today we plug in coffee pots and it went down. But Bill Simon himself and Simon Leckers took care of it. So I'm Kim Anderson with Riverwood Nature Center. I'm acting as the executive director on this project. We call it the Riverwood Project. This was the old Edgar hatchery, ran from 1901 to 2001, hatching baby chicks and also distributing turkey sets and geese. And then the property sat quiet for 10 years, and then 10 years later it went into bankruptcy. And the bank was trying to get the property off their, had to get it off their books. And so they were about to sell it to a developer. And I've known this property for 35 years, kind of raised my children on this property as well, and I just really didn't want to see it develop. I feel like it has a great energy. It has 3,100 feet of frontage on the Oberle River that runs through the property, and so we formed a nonprofit and started to talk to the bank, and they loved the idea, especially since St. Clair County and Polk counties are growing so rapidly with the expansion of the bridge coming across from Minnesota. And they just believe in keeping some green space in all of these developing areas. So they've been working with us. We are run by a board of directors. One of our board of directors is here today, Mike Whiter, and many of you might know him. He's involved in a lot of conservation organizations in the county and the region. But we are trying to fundraise to keep this property in conservation. We have a Knowles Nelson grant, so that about 100 feet past the last building here. Everything north here is Nelson property now, so it is going to be, we got it, our money from that organization or from that fund came out of the stream bank protection fund as well, so that kind of plays in a little bit to today. So very concerned about the environment and about the habitat around the watershed here, so that's what we're doing. We have about 2.5 miles of walking trail here, and I strongly encourage you all to get on your shoes, walking shoes someday and come visit it. We have a fall festival on October 14th from 1 to 6. It's there's food, live music, nature art for the kids, and we're going to have scarecrows out on the trails. So lots of crafters as well. So it's a fun day to come and explore Riverwood. But I'm grateful that you're all here, and I'll try to keep the lights on. That's going to be my role here. So just be patient. We'll keep them on. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. And another big shout out to Wisconsin Farmers Union. We've got Shar Crows in the back. They helped fund this event today, so thank you, Shar, Wisconsin Farmers Union. Provided all your munchies in the back there. So, I guess I'm ready to start. How about you guys? Well, we'll get this presentation going here.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, thank you, Kim and Farmers Union for inviting me up. Again, my name is Ken Bradbury. I'm not the state geologist anymore. I used to be the Wisconsin state geologist until last July. So I'm retired now. I'm a hydrogeologist, and I've worked for the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey for 40-some years. The survey is part of University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, and the survey staff are the people who have mapped the state's groundwater and geology and glacial geology. And we have many, many maps and publications on our website, some of which are published or posted in this room. Now, I have a presentation here about the hydrogeology of St. Croix County. This is kind of a small screen, so those in the back are going to have a hard time seeing. There are seats up front. If you can't hear me, stand up and yell or something like that. What's that?
You want to hold two of them?
So are you holding something up?
No.
No, okay. Thought you were giving me 5 minutes already.
No.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the general geology and hydrogeology of St. Croix County and why it's a pretty vulnerable system here.
I bet that's not turned on.
Oh, okay.
On the side.
Mary.
It's turned on. Should go. Well, I'll sit by the chair and hit the.
Okay. Was it working before? Okay. Okay, well, hit it. I've got this comes. Okay, so just go ahead, Kim. There. Okay, main points of this presentation. Next. Groundwater so these are the main points to take away. Groundwater is the source for drinking water and most other water uses throughout St. Croix County. Next. Groundwater comes mostly from bedrock aquifers locally recharged. Next. Bedrock aquifers in the county are mostly composed of fractured dolomite, fractured limestone, or sandstone. Next. Karst features occur in these bedrock units. Next. The combination of bedrock fractures, and karst features contribute to very rapid groundwater velocities that can reach hundreds of feet per day. Next. And so groundwater in many parts of the county is highly vulnerable to contamination from surface or near surface sources. Okay, next. So this is a map of the simplified bedrock geology of Wisconsin. And I know you probably can't see any details, but this is a map of bedrock. The colors represent different kinds of rocks. Next. And so just a quick tour up here in central northern Wisconsin, we have crystalline Precambrian rocks, things like granite. Next. South of there, in this area and in south, we have a lot of sandstone, Cambrian age sandstone, that's about 400 million years old. Next. We also, in western Wisconsin, have a lot of dolomite, limestone, and younger sandstones. Those are the blue rocks here, including up here in St. Croix County. And finally, over on toward Lake Michigan, we have this purple, which is dolomite of Silurian age, which is a little bit younger rocks. Down at the bottom, if you can see this, there's a cross-section across the state, and it just shows us that there's kind of a dome structure here, where in the middle of the state we have these old Precambrian or crystalline rocks that are higher, and then these younger sandstones and dolomites are draped over them, and they dip to the east over on the east side, and they dip slightly to the west over here. Next. And this again is a diagram you probably can't see too well, but it just shows us that the geologists, we classify these rocks with different names. The names aren't important, but what is important here is that groundwater moves in three different ways through these rocks. Matrix porosity, that is how water moves through, say, sandstone, through between the spaces or the porosity in the sand, between the sand grains. Fractures, I'll show you some pictures of fractures in dolomite. You've probably all seen water can move very rapidly through those fractures. And then we have conduits or caves where water has dissolved caverns or conduits, and we know we have caves around here, so water can move very rapidly. So we have what we might call a triple porosity system, three different modes of transport of water. Next. This is a map of the bedrock in the county. This is a map of St. Croix County, and again, each color represents a different kind of rock. Again, one map made by our geologists at the State Survey. I'm not going to go through this whole map, but just to show you that a lot of this is this pink, which is the Prairie du Chien formation, and I'll just go through some of the rocks, some photos. So next, so this is one of the youngest formations. This is the St. Peter sandstone, also called the Ancel group, that you see in many road cuts. It's a sand, so water can travel fairly quickly through that. Next. This is a picture of the Prairie du Chien formation in a quarry, and you can see this is a dolomite or a limestone with big vertical fractures in it, very common in the county. Again, water can move very rapidly through that. That's okay. And then below that, we have a series of Cambrian age sandstones. This one's called the Jordan Formation. You can see cross-bedding in that from when it was laid down in a shallow sea, but that's forming some of the deeper bedrock aquifers here. Next. It's important to know where groundwater comes from. Groundwater comes from recharge nearby, recharge in the county for the most part. And this is just a picture of the water cycle. Groundwater all starts as precipitation, rain or snow, landing on the landscape. Some of it runs off to become surface water and ends up in a lake or a river. Some of it recharges, and it's around, on the average, something like 10 inches a year of precipitation recharges. That means it enters the groundwater system and it can flow to a well, can flow to a spring, it can flow some distance and discharge to a lake, or in this case, maybe clear over to the Mississippi River or the St. Croix River. But from which it evaporates again and goes back to the cycle. The important thing is groundwater is a local resource. It's recharged nearby. Next. Now, here's a map that you can't see because it's a small but. I notice there's the same maps on the wall over here, so you can look at it at your leisure. This is when we want to know how does groundwater move and what directions does it move. For that, we use a water table map, which is a contour map of the top of the water table. I know you can't read this, so we're going to zoom in. Next. Right around here. So this is Star Prairie, right where we are here. And so on a water table map, the contours represent the elevation of the water table, and groundwater moves from higher to lower water table elevations perpendicular to those lines. Next. So now you see some arrows, and if we wanted to know how water is moving around Star Prairie here, we can see the arrows, so it's going to be moving from east to west, and then discharging right here into the Apple River. That's why the Apple River flows so well. A lot of groundwater discharge. It's maintained by groundwater. Next. Here's just some locations in the county that I may mention in my talk. Here we are at Star Prairie. I know many are interested in the Emerald Sky Dairy. That's over here. I'll talk about Pine Lake, Casey Lake, those are here. Warren, which is down here, and I may mention Hammond and Roberts, but you guys are local, so you probably know where those are. I'm not local, so I had to remember where these places were. So this is mapped to help me. Next. And also, just to remember, there are surface watersheds here. So these show that right now we're in the Apple River watershed, but there's the Willow River watershed, Kinnickinnick, and Rush River, and so forth. So groundwater is serving these surface watersheds, although it's important to note that groundwater watersheds and surface watersheds are not necessarily exactly the same, because you can have groundwater crossing these watershed boundaries. Next. So, as a hydrogeologist in Wisconsin, we've worked on problems of groundwater quality for many years. And one of the things that we've noticed is that groundwater quality problems are often happen where you have carbonate rock, like limestone or dolomite, within 50 feet of the surface. So this is a map of Wisconsin showing places where we have rocks like that within 50 feet of the land surface. And so many of you are familiar with Doerr County, a lot of shallow fractured rock there, a lot of that in the southwest. And there have been a couple of studies of recent years of places like that. Next. So one of those was a study done in Kewaunee County. Next. And one that we recently finished was called the Swig study that was done by our survey staff and others in Grant, Lafayette, and Iowa counties. In those counties, we looked at many domestic wells and sampled those wells for nitrate, bacteria, and some pathogens like viruses, and tried to relate those to land use. The Swig study is the one I worked the most on, and that's recently been published on the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey's website, and you can read about it there. But both of those studies showed us about the same thing. First of all, that a large percentage of the wells in those places were contaminated either with nitrate or with bacteria or both. And that there were some important statistical links that you can make between that contamination and land use. And so you can see that some of the same conditions are up here in St. Croix County, although that kind of extensive study has not been done up here. Next. So I mentioned that shallow depth to bedrock. So here's a detailed depth to bedrock map of St. Croix County. And so the red and the tan are the shallowest depths to bedrock, less than 10 and 10 to 50 are the tan areas. And then it goes from 50 to 100, 100, and 200 is the green. Anyway, you can see that there's a swath kind of like this in the middle of the county where you have relatively shallow bedrock. How does that relate to groundwater quality? Well, let's look at the next slide, which is results of water quality sampling that are on the website from University of Wisconsin Stevens Point. This shows nitrogen averages by section. These are from private wells sampled within section and then averaged together. And so yellow is 5 to 10, and tan is over 10, and red is over 20. Again, you can see there's a trend almost to that same area of higher nitrate in groundwater in about that same area where we had the shallower bedrock. So there's a pretty good correlation to geology and water quality there. Next. Talk about karst a little bit. Karst is a landscape where you have solution features in the bedrock and conduits in the subsurface and sinkholes or swallets, as sometimes they're called, at the land surface where water can rapidly recharge and then move laterally through the ground with very little attenuation of any contaminants because you're moving through conduits. And we do have features like that in St. Croix County. Next. For example, here's I mentioned Pine Lake. Here's a place, an old article that says Pine Lake went dry. Apparently it's done this several times because there was a sinkhole or a cave opened up under the lake and the lake dried up. This is from 1988. I don't know, you local people may know more about that than I do, but apparently that was a famous time when there was some evidence of karst features. Next. Here's a place that I've been to. This is the Rush River bed south of here, and there are a number of places where there are sinkholes in the riverbed itself that the local farmer fills up with dirt every year, and then they open up again. Next. Here's a larger picture of one of my colleagues, Paul Juckham, standing in one of these sinkholes, and here's a swell-up point where the river, when it's flooding, can flow right into the ground there, taking sediment, contaminants, whatever is in it, straight into the ground. So that's a pretty good evidence of some karst action here. Next. Our survey did some test wells at a place called Casey Lake. Again, I showed where that is on the map. And so we drilled 2 test wells down through the Prairie du Chien dolomite. And what you see here on our what we call optical or logs, or where we've put a camera down the borehole, and any place that's black here are places where there are big openings in the well itself. So imagine we drilled a well, we lowered a camera down that, and you see basically caverns down there in the Prairie du Chien. Here's at this level, and then over here at a shallower level. So we know that even though the rock may look very solid at the surface, when you get down deep in it, there are these openings, and it's more evidence of that. Next. Here are well drillers, and they're drilling a well with air rotary technique here. Here's another well here, and the water from the air rotary is blasting out of the other well, some 50 or 60 feet away. So generally that's not supposed to happen. So that shows you there's a very rapid underground connection there. Next, and my final example comes from the town of Warren, TCE, which is trichloroethylene. This was a contamination site that one of our students named Mike Cobb did his master's degree on a few years ago. And so this was, again, town of Warren, and there was a source area of spilled chemicals, TCE, up here, and then they traced a plume of TCE that's probably, it was being remediated. I'm not sure how that stands now. But the interesting thing is that a tracer study was done there. Next. And so here's the geology. Again, we're in this Prairie du Chien dolomite. There were a whole lot of wells that had been drilled for the part of the remediation. And so Mike was able to work with the consultants there to see how fast groundwater was flowing. And because they injected some tracer here at one point, and then they could track it, how far it moved. Next. And so here's what he found, that tracers moved as far as 660 feet in less than 2 days. So we had groundwater velocities measured with these tracer breakthrough curves, ranging from here is a low of 165 feet per day to a high of 338 feet per day. That's really fast for groundwater, which we usually think of moving, inches per year. So feet per day, it's quite common though in fractured rock. So again, it shows you how vulnerable groundwater is, because if you're moving that fast, there's not time for any sorts of degradation of the chemical, filtration, or anything like that. So that's, next slide. That's pretty much my story. Again, I'll say the main points again. Groundwater is the source of your drinking water. It's obtained from mostly bedrock aquifers, a few sand and gravel aquifers, but mostly bedrock. These are composed of fractured, vulnerable rock. We have karst features. This combination of these fractured rock and karst features makes the county's groundwater quite vulnerable to contamination. And I can send this slide. The next one is a bunch of references, some of which you have. I know you couldn't read all these graphics. Some of the maps are already on the wall, and there's some handouts, so you can look at those at your leisure, and I can help explain them to you when we have some time for that. So I'm done. Yay. And
we're promising some robust Q&A.
Yeah, so if we have maybe a couple of questions now, if there are any, but then Kim's going to cut it off, and then we'll have the other speakers.
So does somebody have a burning question? In the back.
I'm sorry. Are there any plans for extensive study in St. Croix County? Because you had mentioned you had done it in other areas.
The question was, are there plans for extensive study? Well, I'm retired, so I'm not going to do it. I haven't heard of any, no. It would be nice if it would be done. And let's see, you had a question.
Yeah, you mentioned your groundwater discharge map isn't there, which I was very intrigued by. And are you just going by the surface topography? Because, as you mentioned, those are different.
Oh, you mean the water table map?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you actually have water table measurements, like a significant amount of them? Or
Yeah, if you look at, I think that map is on the wall right there, and there are a lot of little dots on that. Those are private wells. Those are locations of private wells where water levels were taken from the well construction reports. So it's not as good as if it was all measured directly, but it's the best we can do for a countywide thing. So it is based on wells, yeah. He says it's digitized, okay, as well. One more question.
Yes. Can you tell me whether groundwater is a trust responsibility held by the state of Wisconsin like Fish and Wildlife are? Like Fish and Wildlife are not owned by the landowners, they're basically held in trust by the state. Does the state have the same authority, responsibility to hold groundwater in trust?
Well, that is a good question that I can't answer. That's a legal question, and the trust doctrine has been argued in the Supreme Court, and I'm not sure where it stands right now. So I can't give you a good answer on that. It would be nice if it was very clear, but it isn't. There is not a clear answer to that. That's been debated quite a lot. So I think we ought to move on with Steve now, but I'm going to be here to answer more questions later on.
All right. Thank you, Ken. You can stay here. All right, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, you.
Can everybody hear me okay? I don't have any slides, but I do have some handouts, and I'm just gonna speak from my notes. My notes and some other handouts pertaining to my presentation are on the back table there, so if you wanna get a copy. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Kim and to the planning committee for inviting me to participate. Especially look forward to our discussion and your questions following Tara's presentation. That's the main reason I'm here, just to get some good discussion going and answer your questions. So for now, I'd like to take about 10 minutes or so and refocus our attention not so much on the county scale or the course scale or the watershed scale. I want to kind of refocus and look at some issues we've been looking at here in St. Croix County, and actually I've been looking at around the state for a lot of years. And so we'll, for review, and I can't emphasize enough that everyone here today leaves with a fundamental understanding of how local land uses can and do impact local and regional watersheds, groundwater wells, and local or even regional drinking water supplies, as Ken showed us with his graphics. I can also tell you that a key take-home, hopefully, for you all today is that most, if not all, of what we are currently experiencing or are likely to experience with respect to agricultural impacts on our surface water and our groundwater, it's all fairly largely predictable, you know, and that's actually a good thing. For those that may not know, DNR recently held a public hearing on the permit reissuance and expansion for Emerald Sky Dairy. Right here in right here in St. Croix County, Emerald Township. And for the balance of my presentation, I thought it'd be useful if I read to you the comments I basically made to DNR during that public hearing. When was that, about a month or two?
End of July.
So it's been fairly recently. You know, the issues are still current. So here goes. Dear DNR. For background, I'm currently a professional consultant and have worked very closely with several local citizens on environmental and public health and safety issues connected with the Emerald Sky Dairy operation. For the record, I stand with local citizens in opposition to this permit reissuance and expansion. Previous to becoming a consultant, besides a 4-year hitch in the Army, my entire career has been in public service at all levels of government. My positions for the most part have been in extension and education, including a regional water quality education position with the Federal Extension Service here in the 12-state Midwest region. My first experience with CAFOs was as an undergrad researcher. Can't read my own writing. Maybe I should wear my glasses. It was as an undergrad researcher, actually, working with the USDA. I want to say it was over 40 years ago on the eastern shore of Maryland. I got my bachelor's degree out at the University of Maryland in College Park, way over from growing up in Shawnee here in Wisconsin. So I find myself working for USDA as an undergrad, going to school at the University of Maryland. I'm out in the field, we're on the eastern shore, and I came to grips with the sights and the smells of Purdue poultry farms. Little did I know that it was only a few years after that, again, 40 years ago, that rapid expansion and consolidation would follow in dairy, well, first in hogs and now in dairy. It's worthwhile to also note that my last public service position for 15 years was county conservationist and land conservation department head for Taylor County, not too far from here actually. And during my tenure there, we actually had to come face to face with CAFO application. At that time, this was right around, I think, the year 2000, maybe a little before that. Big Dairy tried to move into Taylor County. It was going to site at 4,000 cows, and at that time, would have been the second largest dairy in the state. Well, needless to say, once I got involved, and once the town folks got involved, we realized pretty quickly that we didn't want that CAFO in our county, mostly because we didn't have enough water for it. You know, water quality is an issue, but there are some parts of the state, as Ken mentioned, in that Precambrian bedrock. And mind you, in Taylor County, there are some places in our county where that bottom aquifer, that Precambrian granite, is only 10 feet from the surface. So if you can imagine trying to get water from granite, it's pretty hard. I saw a lot of well logs, well construction reports around where they wanted to site that dairy, 1 gallon a minute. Now, how are you going to raise a family on 1 gallon a minute, let alone 4,000 cows? So we took the stance right away and almost lost my job as a result of it, that we weren't going to permit. So that kind of put DNR in line. Yeah. Okay. So based on, just two very brief comments then that I mentioned to DNR. Based on this operations, and I'm talking now about Emerald Sky Dairy again. Based on this operation's past history of mismanagement and the resulting damages to the local environment and very real risk to public health and safety, in my view, it is ludicrous to think things will be any different with permitting an expansion of this facility. Was it not Einstein that said something to the effect of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity? And here's another good one that people forget about. How about the wisdom of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? I mean, everybody's heard that, right? So personally, if anything, I would seriously suggest shutting down this operation altogether and spending the time and money on compensating local citizens, families, and communities for the damage already done. Last, and in the words of a good friend and former DNR section chief, liquid livestock manure, and I will add liquid waste of any kind, and karst just do not mix. If anything, these very vulnerable karst areas require special protections, not more CAFOs, not expansions. And by the way, how about a statewide CAFO moratorium? So at least we could have a little time to determine just what damage is already done and what we're likely to expect, in the next decades or century. To summarize, I think you have many folks here in St. Croix County, in Emerald Township, and around the state that are sick and tired of seeing these excessively large livestock farms use our lands and our watersheds for their waste disposal. Basically, far too many animals with too few spreadable acres. Many local soils, fields, and watersheds carrying capacity for animals and nutrients like phosphorus have been exceeded for many years now. Unless you think I'm picking on one farm in particular, or CAFOs in general, I'm here to inform you that this isn't something that's exclusive to large farms. I've worked with all size farms, I've worked with grazers, I've worked with all livestock types. It's always going to be the fields closest to the production area and closest to proximity of that farm that are going to be issues first. It doesn't matter what size. So if they're mismanaging their phosphorus, they don't have enough spreadable acres for those animals, no matter what size, you're going to find the same problem. Last, and probably most importantly from my perspective, we need to get back in earnest to the work of watershed and wellhead protection and pollution prevention if we're going to secure a future for our children and grandchildren with drinkable, fishable, and swimmable waters. Thank you.
All right, Steve will take one quick question. We do have Simon Electric here who is able to put a loose wire back in place. So they need the power off for 2 minutes. So why don't we go ahead and do that? He can answer questions. And we'll see if that works.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, thank you for your letter. I appreciate that. I actually live 7 miles east of the dairy, so I'm very concerned about this. Do you have any idea whether this permit will in fact go through despite the opposition to it?
I'm going to go out on a limb, but I don't know if there's ever been a case, except the ones I'm aware of in Taylor County and then up in Bayfield County, where DNR actually denied a permit. What ends up usually happening, and I've seen it time and time again, new CAFO permit comes into a county and the town says, well, we're going to wait to see what DNR does. And so DNR says, let's permit it, and the county says, okay, we're going to permit. I took the opposite approach. I looked everything over. I couldn't even get a complete application for a permit, so I kept telling the farm, hey, I can't permit you. But I think it really depends on the locals to protect their people. You know, DNR, you can't count on DNR, I'm sorry to say.
So then who do we talk to? How do we share our opinion?
I would share with the local folks, your town board, your county committees that are involved in oversight and enforcement of the regulations. I was kind of at an advantage too in Taylor County because when I first went into the county, there was no protections whatsoever, no ordinances, nothing. And it took me about 5 years, but finally they saw the light and said, Steve, you better write an ordinance. And sure enough, about 2 or 3 years later is when that big farm tried to move in. So. Ron, hey, good to see you, buddy.
So what ordinance did you put in place that you would have permitted that table under?
I developed what I called an animal manure and nutrient management ordinance for Taylor County prior to that coming in. So my involvement in the permitting. We also had that township where that CAFO tried to move in. They were the only township in our county that adopted the livestock sighting legislation, so they also had a seat at the table. Yes, ma'am.
Is it possible to get a copy of that ordinance online?
Yes, just go to the Taylor County website, and I believe it's chapter 63 of the county code for Taylor County. Yeah. You know, and most all of these ordinances are also available through DATCAP and DNR. They have a website dedicated to county ordinances. That'd be another way to get it. Any other questions?
Being that I'm east of the dairy and he was talking about the way the ground flows, any idea of how vulnerable our home is? Being that it's 7 miles east of this dairy?
You know, I wish I had a graphic up here showing, and there's some on the back there. The one I'm thinking of is for the well recharge area for the village of Stetson. If you can see that back there, because you have to consider what Ken was saying, the groundwater for your well is gonna be recharged very locally. So in other words, your water quality in your well may be only impacted a quarter mile, the land area around a quarter mile from your well. Unless you're directly downgrading from where they're spreading, you know, it may not be a problem. It really depends what's going on in the recharge area of your well. And just so to try and get a picture of this, if you have a pretty clear understanding of how watersheds work, surface water wise, they all drain to that surface water. Well recharge areas are much the same concept. It's like an analogy. A watershed is to a water body as a well recharge area is to a well. What matters is what's going on that land surface that's recharging that well, or what's going on in the land surface that's contributing to that water body, that watershed. So really look at very closely what the land uses are, what they're actually doing on the land surface.
Okay, Tara's ready.
Tara.
I'm ready, yep.
Thank you.
Can you guys hear me okay? Oh, we're switching microphones.
Wait, I'll pin this on here. There you go.
Can you hear me now? All right, I'm getting thumbs ups, thank you. I'm gonna turn this guy off, maybe. I'm gonna set this one down, and then we'll see what, okay. So my name is Tara Daun. I work with the Farmer-Led Watershed Councils. I'm the watershed coordinator for the Wisconsin Farmers Union. So 100% of my work is actually devoted to working with farmers on improving water quality at the surface level that affects the groundwater and surface waters. So I'm going to talk quickly just about what these councils do, the challenges and why this is hard to implement improvement practices, and the successes that we've had. And then again, I'm excited about questions too. I'm setting the timer on my watch because I need to be buzzed, because I will talk too long. Also, I know I'm a fast talker, so if you are going to complain to me about it afterwards, maybe instead of doing that, just give me like a big breath, and then also just buckle in a little bit. So first of all, I just want to introduce the idea of these farmer-led watershed councils. Show of hands, is anybody familiar with these at all? Okay, awesome. Okay, great. So most of you are aware that farmer-led watershed councils are groups of farmers that get together in one geographic area of a watershed and go, how do we improve our conservation practices on farm? And right now in 2023, we have 43 groups that have been funded through the Department of Agriculture. So these are the official groups. There are some other groups that don't always get funding every year that also exist. So we have a good segment of our geography in Wisconsin covered. Clearly still room for improvement. I work with 4 of these councils here in the Northwest within that red circle. We have some adjacent councils also that I work with, but not primarily as my main goal. So I work in St. Croix County with the Dry Run Farmer-Led Council. I work in Polk County with the Horse Creek Farmer-Led Council. I work in Dunn County with the Hay River Farmer-Led Council, and Pierce County with the South Kinney Farmer-Led Council. The main goals of these groups, like I said, are to improve soil quality on farms, which then will improve water quality below and adjacent to the farms. These groups provide education, so it's peer-to-peer learning, peer-to-peer education, as well as working with the resources that already exist. And we also provide direct incentives to farmers for conservation practices. So our goal is not to subsidize conservation efforts forever, but there is a cost to change, and change is scary and hard to manage. So we try to reduce the risk that farmers take by giving them some monetary incentives. And that comes from grant funding that we've received from private foundations, as well as from the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, which I will refer to as DACCAP. Are we all, I haven't started talking too fast yet? Okay, that's good. So this slide keeps coming earlier and earlier in these presentations because to me it gets more and more important every time I talk. We work, a lot of people say, well, we have to compromise. We have to compromise between business and the environment. And we actually don't believe in compromises. Compromise inherently means that everybody is losing something. Nobody is getting completely what they want. So we actually work more in terms of collaboration. I used to use an orange, but we're coming up on October and I realize it's a better metaphor anyway. So if you have two people who want one pumpkin, what do? Two people, one pumpkin.
Make pumpkin pie.
You will. A lot of people would say, right, you're going to King Solomon the pumpkin. You're going to cut it in half and everybody gets half of the pumpkin, right? But if you ask those people, why do you want a pumpkin? And one says, I want pumpkin pie. And the other one says, I want to make a jack-o'-lantern. Or one says, I want pumpkin pie. And the other one says, I want to make trail mix with pepitas. Or whatever it is, right? You can actually solve both people's problems, right? You can say, okay, you can make a jack-o'-lantern with this, and then we'll make a pumpkin pie after X date. Or I can do this and you can do this. Then everybody gets fully what they want. If you give each of those people half of it, neither person is able to reach their goals. But if you actually sit and talk to people and understand what conclusions everybody's trying to come to, you can actually work towards the same thing and everybody can be happy. We have never taken a vote in any of the groups that I have worked with in the 2 years that I've worked with them. This is because we work on consensus and collaboration. Also, we know that everybody wants to eat food. So we are not coming to meetings going, oh, farmers, everybody wants to shut down the farmers. We know that agriculture is part of Wisconsin, and agriculture is part of our identity as well as our economy. So I believe that there's no one in this room who doesn't want us to grow food here. I also believe that there are no farmers out there being snidely whiplash, like, I'm gonna pollute the watershed today, Marge. Like, that's not what this is about. So if we come to an understanding that everybody wants clean water and we have to figure out how to make that happen while also creating a viable, vibrant economic agriculture community, we can find ways to do that by working through consensus and collaboration. When we did a survey of every farmer that we could identify within our 4 watershed councils, we came up with a list of every farmer working more than 80 acres. We wanted to talk to our larger scale farmers. We sent them all surveys. It was about 300. We had about a 25% response rate from our farmers. We asked them, do farmers have a responsibility to minimize erosion off of their fields? And 87% strongly agreed with that sentiment. 87% of farmers strongly agree that they have a responsibility to maintain the soil health on their fields. When 0 of them disagreed with that at all. So it was basically strongly agree, somewhat neutral, or agree somewhat. And 100% of our respondents had a positive response to the word soil health. So when we talk to farmers now, that is what you will hear us talking about, is soil health. Soil health can be synonymous with a lot of other factors like ecology, environmentalism, sustainability, conservation. And we asked them about those words too. They felt okay about them, but 100% felt positive about the term soil health because that's farmers thinking about the health of their farms and how that impacts them as well as their greater community. So when we talk about soil health, we're coming up now from the beneath where Ken and Steve talked about the groundwater, the karst topography, all our bedrock, and we're moving up to the actual part of the soil that we come in contact with. Our principles of soil health, there are 4. This is from the Natural Resource Conservation Service. There's tons of different definitions of this, but this is what we generally work with. We want to minimize disturbance. We want to maximize biodiversity. We want to maximize soil cover and maximize living roots. So all of these are basically saying healthy soil needs really strong microbiology within it. So what we need to do is create a really healthy ecosystem for those to exist in. Minimizing disturbance and maximizing soil cover, What that lines up to practically for farmers mostly is minimizing tillage, or what we call no-till. So this is one of our, I call it one of our bread and butter practices, the big ones that we focus on with farmers. The next part of that, cover crops. So maximizing liver roots and maximizing biodiversity is adding another crop beyond corn and soybeans, or maybe a small grain that might be in rotation, and working with farmers to increase the amount of time that a living root is in the soil. Adding a cover crop for a farm and management is very difficult. This is probably the main thing that we spend money on incentivizing, because we have a very short growing season. There's not a lot of time after harvest to get another crop in. So we really have to work on how we can pragmatically make this happen, because farmers see the benefit of it. Also in our survey, we saw farmers like the idea of it, but how to make it happen is really a practical challenge. So here, this is actually, I'm just so excited that this event is here, because like 5 miles from here is our test plot for Horse Creek. And these 2 pictures here are actually from that test plot. So we have 5 management types, or trials, that the owner of the land is here. Hi, Tim. If anybody wants to talk to me, then I might direct you to Tim, because he knows so much more about it than I do. But these are my hands. I pulled soil from our long-term no-till, so this is the 10th year of this trial, no-till and cover crops, and then also our tillage and no cover crops. And you can see that the soil is significantly different. You can even see on my hands, it aggregated on my hands differently. So we have real soil structure. If you can picture which one of these you would actually buy as a potting mix, it's definitely going to be this one. So we actually do see that there are differences here, and our demonstration plots are also helping show that. So this is called the underwear intermission. I'm going to come over here now. So we understand the effects of soil health. Farmers like the idea of soil health, but it's this big, intractable, how do you actually make that work across hundreds to thousands of acres, right? How to scale up these ideas, because we can harp on the theory of it all day, but really does it work in terms of making a profit on this? So my farmers came to me and they said, we need something to actually show people that this is not about butterflies and rainbows. This is actual practical things that make a difference. I did not come up with this idea, but I totally latched on to the Soil Your Undies program as our way to show this to people. So it's called Soil Your Undies. We bury underwear in the field. I work with the farmers to track what the history of each of those fields is and how it's managed, and then we dig it up. Oh boy, here's the time. Okay, I've got 1 minute left. So then we dig it up to show people what their microbiology is actually doing. Because when we have active microbiology, what we really have happening is recycling of nutrients, scavenging of nutrients, and building soil structure for water infiltration. Huge benefits for farmers. So I have to go really fast, but you can talk to me about this later, is up here we have limited soil health practices. This one was actually on top of the soil. This one, high tillage, compacted soil. All these top row ones, just basic, close to conventional. Every farm is different, but tillage and no cover crops is what we got on the top row. These pairs on the bottom were in the ground for the same amount of time for the same year in adjacent fields. Now this one is CRP, where we have almost complete degradation. I don't know if you can see that there's a pair of underwear here anymore. This one here though, so this is CRP for 30 years, and we can call that basically a natural environment. This one here is very close to that. This is a farmer, his name is Jeff Lake in Daun County. He has been doing soil health practices long term. So he is still trying to make a profit. He's got beef, corn, soybeans. He's doing wheat and small grains, long-term soil health practices of no-till and cover crops. So we know, and we've got studies to prove it from our demonstration plots, that if we can work with the soil and get it closer to a natural ecosystem while still trying to maintain a profit on the farm, we can make huge improvements in what we're able to protect for the soil and keep on the farm plots instead of losing them to surface and groundwater. I am running out of time, but in general, please don't yell at me, Kim. Last year in 2022, we planted 3,500 acres of cover crops directly with our farmers within our watersheds. That is a small drop in the bucket compared to what other groups are doing, but it is significant, we feel like. We have acres in perennial establishment, and we also work with farmers on nutrient management. Because of all that work, directly we were able to impact 4,296 pounds of nitrogen from entering surface waters, 3,000 pounds of phosphorus, and 2,100 tons of sediment from leaving fields compared to conventional management. So we do feel like we are able to make actual strides here, and our goal is just to continue that growth. And here is in Horse Creek, so just to our northwest here, the trend since 2016 of adoption. Now we're top bar here is 5,000 acres, and the total number of acres in Horse Creek is about 17,000. So we've got a ways to go in terms of adoption, but we are on the right trend line direction here. And there's my contact information if anyone wants it. I have more information, but we had to stop me here. So do I have time to take questions?
Sure, a couple questions, and then we'll probably take. Okay. And you got a couple questions for Tara?
I answered all of them. I'm too terrifying to ask.
Okay, how about?
Tim's got one here.
Oh, sorry.
You should mention that the efforts of the Horse Creek watershed saved 3.4 million pounds less algae in Cedar Lake because of the reduction in phosphorus.
I should say that. Yep, that's what they did. So one thing is that 1 pound of phosphorus represents about 500 pounds of algae, give or take. And so by keeping phosphorus on fields, we're able to protect surface water. But we also have to remember that all of that is doing downstream effects of the ecosystem in terms of all those things. Yep.
So Ken and Steve want to come up, and Tim can get his presentation ready, and we will answer a couple more, take a few more minutes till Tim's ready at least. So, got 3 of them up here now, so.
Take your best shot.
Do we have any other questions for these 3 amigos? Oh, yeah.
Amiga.
Oh, I just had a question, Ken, with your map showing the well testing going up the middle of the state from Stevens Point. That wasn't a real scientific collection of data. That's just people who test their water and then send it to Stevens Point. Right. And I just want to, as far as I know, there's no real scientific process going on in the state or St. Croix County to really assess where we're at with water quality. I don't know if that's...
Well, I guess I wouldn't say it's non-scientific. It's non-random, meaning it's people who volunteered their samples. So through personal water quality testing or events like this. On the other hand, it's a very large data set, and it's well curated by UW Stevens Point, and so it's a data set that I think is very valuable in terms of giving us pictures of what's going on across the state, because it is statewide. Others here may know if there's other things going on in St. Croix County. I don't know what's going on here.
We'll talk about it for 30 minutes.
Okay.
Tim will answer that. Anybody else?
It's just a simple question. I think it's for Ken. What year was the Warren Township study done in St. Croix County?
That was probably 12 years ago or something like that. I'd have to look back for you, but it was at least a decade ago.
If I understand it correctly, a private well is recharged with local conditions around. If you're over the 10 parts per million, how long does it take for that to reduce to less than 10 parts per million?
So the question was if the well is got over 10 parts per million, how long does it take to go down? Is that right? Well, that all depends on the input. So if one of the good things about nitrate is it's quite mobile in groundwater. So if you turn off the source, in other words, you take the nitrate out of the recharge water, eventually the well will clean up because the nitrate is mobile. It will be diluted and move away. The long length of time that might take all depends on the depth of the well, the local geology, and how much the well is used, and a lot of other things. So it's pretty hard to say how long it would take to clean up. Depends on the well.
Can I answer that a little bit?
Go ahead.
Considering the recharge area for that well and the land uses within that area, we've been able to make some connections. Because if you think about nitrate in your groundwater or your drinking water as what we call an environmental indicator. In other words, if you have nitrate in your well above the background levels, that's a good indication that there's pathways there for other contaminants that you may not even be measuring in your well, in your groundwater, in your drinking water. The other thing that we found out is now focusing on the recharge area. Let's say that recharge area is mostly farm fields, like a lot of them are. What we found too is we're using now not nitrate as the environmental indicator, we're using phosphorus in the soil, in the fields that are measured with these within these nutrient management plans as an environmental indicator of the potential for nitrate to get in the wells in that recharge area. And sure enough, there's a correlation, and there's a really good graphic that Kim developed showing the soil phosphorus levels in the fields in the recharge area of those wells, and then what the corresponding nitrate level is in those wells. And what we've seen, a good example, is the Town Hall well in Emerald Township. I think that well, if I'm not mistaken, was first drilled less than 10 years ago, wasn't it?
7.
Okay, so I think when it was first measured with nitrate, it was 7 parts per million. Now we've seen it over 40, 50 parts per million. And sure enough, when you look at the fields in the recharge area of that well, phosphorus has just continued to climb. So long answer to your question is, if you have fields recharging that well that are excessively high in phosphorus now, I'm talking like 100, 200, maybe even higher than that, that's a good indication that nitrate is going to be leaching under that field, because that's our indicator from phosphorus for quite some time. So until that phosphorus level goes down, which could take a really long time, and until they quit adding nitrogen and phosphorus to that field, it could actually go up instead of down, much like we saw with the Emerald Town well.
We got one question back here.
I have a political question for Tara. I've been reading that the Biden administration is striving to make the next version of the Farm Bill much more conservation friendly and friendly to family farmers and less slanted towards large industrial scale agriculture. Has Farmers Union had an opportunity to be involved in that process, and do you have much hope that that will actually happen?
Well, the opportunity to be involved and my hope for it are two different answers. But yes, Farmers Union has been very involved in that. That's kind of, well, it's very, very central to the Farmers Union premise of focusing on protecting small-scale farmers as well as a protection of stewardship. So we, at the state level, have supported it, but we talk about it at our fly-in when we go to DC and to Madison, but also they are very focused on it at the National Farmers Union and talk about it frequently. So yes, Farmers Union is definitely part of that conversation and has it on their radar. As far as my hope that it will happen, I'm just hopeful we get a farm bill at this point. They keep pushing it back, so I don't know. We have seen a lot of funding come through in support of NRCS. NRCS has a lot more funding for farmers, and especially for their historically underserved farmers, they keep providing extra funding. So I am somewhat hopeful, and we have seen movements in the right direction on there. But it's an uphill battle in terms of other powers at play for that one.
All right, did we have a question here?
I just have a question about, like these extreme climate events where we get dumped with rain in a short amount of time. Is there any testing or anything that goes on after these significant rain events where we get like a lot of rain in a really short amount of time?
I know there's been a lot of surface water testing after rainfall events, because that's generally when you want to be out there. But I guess I'm not aware of any groundwater or well testing that's done connected with these. But certainly it's a major issue, because if you also consider that a lot of the engineering that goes into manure storage lagoons and manure storage systems and other what we call hard practices on farms, those may be only engineered to 25-year storms. And if you're getting year after year 50 and 100-year storms, we could have some major disasters out there because they're just not engineered for that. I wanted to say one really critical thing too that it's important to know here. And this goes for the whole state. Well, actually the whole country. We're at a bit of a disadvantage if you want to talk about sustainability, and that's really what we're after. We want to sustain our agriculture. We want to have good food, and we want to sustain our agriculture and not harm the environment. Well, when I first started doing graduate work down in Madison, my test plots were at the Lancaster station in Grant County. And I got a first-hand look and really started studying the rotations here in Wisconsin, the crop rotations. And back then, maybe the case still down there, but what I see now is less and less diversity on our farms. When you see crops, you see corn and you see soybeans. Back then, and maybe it's still the case, we were looking at a 7 or 8 year rotation. You had 2 or 3 years of corn, small grains, and maybe 3, 4, 5 years of hay. That diversity is gone. Let me tell you, there's a direct relationship between diversity, whether you want to talk at the farm level, at the field level, at the soil level. Tara talked about soil biodiversity. There's a direct relationship between diversity in agriculture and sustainability. If you go too far one way, you're not going to be sustainable. We have to go back towards really promoting diversity on our farms. That's the only way through this.
I would also add in that if we insist on getting it, there tends to be somewhat of a misconception like, oh, the problem is dairies, the problem is manure. But as we move away from those livestock, we have less hay on the ground. And if we convert all of our fields into corn and soybean, we have much bigger problems with a lot of these issues. So we have to keep in mind that livestock is not the problem. Livestock management is definitely something we have to talk about and have responsible stewardship of. But we need to keep in mind that livestock is really, really good for the diversity of the landscape as well as the ecosystem management principles that we're going for. He's had his hand up for a very long time.
I wanted to just respond
sorry.
about the extreme event. One other thing that is maybe a little different take on this is if one of the things we worry about with extreme events like floods is overtopping wells. You know, and we've seen this many times in Wisconsin where people's, you know, we have one of these big events, maybe short-term, maybe long-term, where water is over the top of a well, so surface water is going in, and then that well is contaminated. And that well can contaminate the next well. So that's, and that's something we are seeing more often as we have years with high water tables or these high flood events. That's something to think about and pay attention to.
Especially if your well is located in a floodplain or near a river or a creek.
But it can also happen even if it's not. If we're just getting land flooding, you know, if we get one of these 5-inch storms, which we see now, it doesn't have to be in a stream valley to get all of a sudden we're ponding water.
Oh gosh, we're going to answer this question forever. But the other thing I wanted to say is that the models have actually changed for what we actually prepare for now. So if you look at what waterways are being installed on fields right now, they're much wider than they were 5 years ago because the waterways, there are people smarter in this room, but I think they're built to a 10-year flood standard. 25, okay, I'm getting nods. Okay, so they're built to a 10-year standard, and that standard has increased. So it used to be that the 10-year flood was considered 6 inches, now it's considered over 7.5. And so we are actually engineering based on our new expectations of what our climatic normal looks like now.
All right, so there was one other person that had their hand up for a very long time over there. Oh, Boris.
Speak up. I would disagree a little bit with something Steve-O said up there about the water quality monitoring that's going on. I would say that there's really pretty minimal water quality monitoring going on around most of our landscape. And there is official DNR programs, the Water Action Volunteers Program. They have citizens go out and do monitoring. You can get involved. There are scientists and students doing testing here and there, but if you want to see monitoring on any particular watershed, I would not assume that there's much testing happening unless you know somebody who's doing that specifically. Because one more part of the DNR being overwhelmed is not being able to do that as much as we would like and hope that they would. And jumping off something Ken said about if your well is overtopped with floodwater, that is actually something that most counties do have assistance to get your well tested if that happens. I think that, and if you have a new baby, are the only generally available county free well tests that they'll give you. And then it depends on county by county. There's lots of different programs. My question for Tara, since I'm a process nerd, is you mentioned consensus is how you make decisions in your groups, and I'm curious what that means to you, because I've heard many definitions for that and have strong opinions personally.
Yes, well, I'm lucky that our groups are pretty homogenous in the terms that our groups are farmer-led councils, so it's not as if we have people from a huge diversity of backgrounds coming with lots of competing interests. But what that looks like at the council level is we're sitting in a circle. Our leaders are volunteer leaders and nobody's got a gavel. And so it's bringing up points on the agenda and somebody says, well, this is a real concern that I have. And somebody else says, well, yeah, but is that really a concern or do we know enough? And then it's a bounce back and forth of either they talk through that problem and decide that is a priority area that they want to go through and they talk through it. Or if someone says, well, I understand that maybe we don't have enough information on that yet, so let's go look for it. So that's kind of the thing of building that consensus. And then if they do find an action item that they want to go forward with, it's coming up with an idea and then someone else saying, well, but what about this because it's complicated? And then we mold the idea down into something that's reasonable, actionable, and agreeable to the entire group. And so we've never lost a member due to a major disagreement with how something's moving forward. We've never had a strong argument. That's again the personalities in the room, but it's always been just a level of mutual respect because all of these farmers live in the same neighborhood, have generational relationships, but also the adding points on top of each other until they can come up with a picture and a direction that they want to go forward together.
All right, we'll take two more and then Tim's got to go.
Yeah, quick. Are municipal wells seeing any of the similar problems, an increase in problems like individual wells are seeing?
They are. Municipal wells in most places are deeper, so that generally they see fewer problems, but there are some problems. For instance, Madison, around where I'm from, we're seeing PFAS in the municipal wells now. We've seen viruses in the municipal wells, some of the deeper wells. So yes, again, municipal wells are monitored more often, they're tested more often. Most of them have some kind of wellhead protection plan, so it's not as, at least they're being tested. But yeah, there are problems with municipal wells too.
I want to add to what Ken said because I have worked with a lot of municipalities on municipal well issues. And I can tell you that when I learned years ago, this was through the Clean Water Act, the EPA required in our state, the DNR, to go around to all the public water systems at the time. And this was, I think, throughout the 70s and 80s. I think the Clean Water Act was in 72 or something like that. But anyway, DNR was supposed to go out to all the municipal water systems and do what was called a source water assessment. And basically what that is you look at the recharge area for that public well and you do an assessment of what sort of contaminant sources might get into that well. And for a lot of municipalities, I'm here to tell you, that's as far as it went. As an example, I worked with recently the city of Ashland. We dug up their source water assessment. It took us a while, but we found it finally from 1993. Well, think of all the land use changes over that length of time. So what it said to me was, not only is it enough to have an updated source water assessment if you're on a public well, you have to go the distance, and believe it or not, a lot of municipalities haven't. All they have is an outdated source water assessment. You want to go the additional steps of developing what's called a source water protection plan, and then once you have the plan in place with an updated assessment, you can develop what's called a source water protection ordinance, where there's actually regulations within that recharge area. And believe it or not, a lot of municipalities haven't gone the additional steps. So we got public wells, a lot like we have private wells, with no protections whatsoever. The new wells have to do it. They have to go through all those steps. But older wells, which a lot of municipalities have, they have no protection.
All right, let's do one more, and then you guys take a break, and then.
Just a quick piece of information. Septic systems are the #1 groundwater polluter in the United States. And in Daun County, we have a recharge map that we put together using 91 soil types. And we've broken down the percolation rates in the recharge area from excellent, very good, good, fair, and poor. And because of this map, 2 townships have passed ordinances protecting the recharge areas and controlling what type of industries can move into the excellent, very good, and good recharge areas. So I would encourage all the counties in the state of Wisconsin to put together one of these recharge maps using the soil types, because the soil types are very accurate in telling you about the percolation rates. And once you have that piece of information, you can then pass ordinances controlling the groundwater. Thank you.
All right, thank you guys, and we'll give you a break and let Tim start in. Thank you.
Thanks for having me here. You'll see as I talk throughout, I have 2 presentations. I'm gonna present Adam Mead's presentation. He's sitting on the very edge of his chair right now, waiting for his firstborn son to come into the world. And so I didn't want him to come all the way to Star Prairie, where Kim has assured me is bad cell reception. And so I'm going to dovetail and try to build on what Ken, Steve, and Tara have already presented as far as how those things are in fact legitimate and how we're documenting the effects of those factors and things that were claimed. For example, Steve was indicating, if you have a high phosphorus, rising phosphorus, you probably have a problem with nitrate. Well, the reason for that, no one's going to buy $10,000 worth of phosphorus and put it on a field for a crop production, especially when you're growing corn and soybeans. The reason that phosphorus is going up is because it's being used as a disposal site for manure. Manure is not a balanced fertilizer, like the fertilizer you would buy and put on your crop. It has way more phosphorus than nitrogen. So what's going on in those fields is they're using manure to satisfy the nitrogen requirement of the crop, and as a result, the phosphorus goes through the roof. And you probably will have some nitrate issues from that. So all of the things that have been said so far, I concur with and can show you how we've been working to improve that. Does this thing work? Or is this better? Is this better?
It's probably better for the people in the back.
I don't have this for defense. This is my pointer.
Do you want me to advance the slides?
Yeah, I can do it. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start out and talk about nitrogen. Groundwater nitrate is, you're not alone. It is throughout the whole entire United States, wherever there's active agriculture in the United States, there's nitrate problems. That doesn't make it okay or anything. It was a problem when I started in my career, and it's a problem today. Things are being done, but it's still there. And we'll show how this is manifested on the landscape. I've got some work that we've done. But it is the most common problem that we have in our groundwater in the state of Wisconsin. The most common surface water problem we have is phosphorus. 50 water bodies are listed every biennium or more for phosphorus in the state of Wisconsin. So essentially we take 2 to 5 off of the list and we add 50 every 2 years. Clearly the work that we're all doing, we've got neat things going on at the county, we've got these producer-led groups, we've got a lot going on, but we're clearly not satisfying our calling, which is protect water quality completely. So, hate to go doom and gloom, but we have to understand what we're talking about. Nitrogen is common, it's a biologically important and essential element for plant life. 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. Nitrogen is deposited on the landscape every time it rains. And if there's a lot of lightning, you get a little more nitrogen because of that ozone reaction that occurs. It enters the system, plants generally take it up, some is lost down through the profile. And if that was, that nitrogen is not lost forever, it will come out in groundwater and surface water eventually, but it is a cycle. It's extremely important for agriculture of all types, both crops and animal agriculture. The manures and synthetic fertilizers that are used are important and essential. And we use about 16.5 million pounds of nitrogen in St. Croix County, synthetic fertilizer right now. And then we have manures as well. We measure nitrate as a lot of our work in the county because it's easy, but it is an indicator. If you've got less than 1 part per million of nitrate, you've got what I would call pure water, clean water. It could be some of that, if say 0.5 part per million, that could be natural. But as you get above that, we know there's some result of land use disturbance, whether that's agriculture, whether that's a septic system. And as you increase, you also increase the potential for other related items to get into that water supply. So we measure nitrate because it's a fairly easy and repeatable measurement. It has some health effects, and we'll have somebody talk about that specifically later. But it's also related to what else is going on, and that's been alluded to. I think Steve was talking about that. The county has been working on this for a long time. In the late 90s, they began a program where they would cost share samples, and then we would get the results. The landowner would get the results. All of those together throughout the county showed that about 10% of the wells in our county are above the 10 part per million drinking water standard. That area that's been alluded to around Hammond and Roberts and Warren are hot spots, if you will, or vulnerable areas that we need to keep an eye on. And that was up until 2010. Those were kind of a summary. And then about 2016, we got this, I'll talk more specifically about it in my next talk, but there was a special study group that was appointed by the County Board of Supervisors, and they had a lot of things they wanted staff to work on, and they wanted better data, they wanted baseline data, they wanted education, they wanted a lot of things. And in 2017, they published the results of all their findings, and there was no budget in 2018 for it. In 2019, there was, and they hired me to try to do it. And I thank them every day. One of the things that we did was we set up a 5-year study. In 2019 was the first year. We utilized a grid pattern approach over the entire county, and we took sign-ups, volunteers from all those grids, all the orange ones, basically. We had sign-ups online where people chose to basically be the representative from that particular grid. And then we measured that for nitrate, chloride, and other things for the past 4 or 5 years. I think we're doing our sampling in here in a couple of weeks for the 5th time. And we wanted to measure the same wells to try to get trend, and we wanted to have some level of control over what we were doing. The previous work was very random, and it didn't necessarily tell us anything other than the fact that we had about 10% of the wells over 10. We found a lot more out through this approach. Through year 4, this is basically what we found. These are our grids, not those previous larger grids that were presented on the screen. We had a couple of grids that were above 10 parts per million. If you look at all the results, we had about 12 to 13% of the wells now are over 10. In about 12 years' time, it definitely changed. Our other work that we've been doing, we measured about 1,600 samples over the last 3 years at our nitrate clinics, and the well percentage is nearly identical to the official CGMP network, and it shows that we have had increasing nitrates in the county in the past 10 to 12 years. Furthermore, we found that 77% of the wells that we've measured have greater than 2 parts per million in the groundwater, which means they're above that natural level, and they're definitely being impacted by the surface. And it points out to show or prove that what was said earlier is that we have a very vulnerable groundwater supply in our county. Usually, in some other areas that I've worked, we've had 40–50% of the wells are 1 part per million or less. We never get that in our sampling. We have a vulnerable water supply. Essentially, the results can be used with the population that we have. We also know what the population of folks are in our cities and developed areas. I developed a chart that is basically what I would call the exposure that we have. We have almost 6,000 residents that have water that's over 10 parts per million. That's about 13%. That would put us ranked 3rd in the state, only exceeded by Daun and Waukesha counties with regard to the number of residents that have water that's over 10 parts per million. But more telling is this large number of folks that are in that middle section that are definitely meeting the standard, but they're approaching the standard, and they definitely need to know that there can be other constituents, especially if you're close to 10 parts per million. As you approach that level, almost certainly have other constituents from the land uses in your water. Another thing that we did was we did a study for 2 years on about 15 wells where we looked at the variation monthly. And so we can say now that if you're at 8.5 parts per million, you may exceed 10 at some times during the year. So we know that because we studied the standard deviations of those wells. We know that it goes up and down. And so you can't just take one sample and say, well, I'm 9.8, honey, we're not putting in that RO unit yet. Well, another point on that is we have almost the same number of residents that are drinking 10 part per million water as we do drinking less than 1 part per million water in St. Croix County. Over time, our nitrates have increased, our population has gone up, our number of cows has basically gone down to about 18,000 milking cows, and it's stayed about that level. So our animal production numbers are about the same. A lot of the small ones have left. Some of them have gone up. But overall, the animal units are about the same. Some of the units are bigger, and that makes it harder to manage properly. So we introduce nitrogen into our system in a lot of different ways, but mostly the biggest contributors would be septic, fertilizer, and manure. Those enter a system. You know, you can lose some of that nitrogen out through gas, through the air, and some of it does leave. It's hard to measure that, very difficult. Some of it's used into plants, and we ship the crops out of here, and they go wherever they go. And some of it can be lost. But it will go somewhere. It's not going to just disappear into the system. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So we really started to dig into some of these things that have been talked about. What's going on around the wells? So now we have this database of a lot of wells, and we have well logs for all of those, a large part of them. What's going on with the direction of flow, the soil types around these wells, the geology, and the well construction. It's a lot to think about, but that's what has to be looked at for individual analysis when you have somebody who's got an extremely high well and they're across the street from their neighbor who's got the lowest well in the county. Why is that? So, Adam prepared this example, and he wanted me to ask the crowd which well has the highest nitrate concentration to try to be super sleuths. Well A has a well depth of 71 feet, and it's got topsoil of sand and gravel, and it's got lower geology of sand and gravel. And well B is a deeper well. It's 121 feet. It's got clay and sand mix. Even though it's really close, there must be a transition in the soil type in that area. And the lower geology is limestone. So we've got to divide the group. How many people think well A is higher than well B? Anybody want to go on a limb? Yeah? Who thinks B is higher? They think I'm trying to fudge you or something here. Okay, well, we'll go through what we would look at based on what we know. First, we'd look at that land cover, and we have good data on this now. East, so we have the groundwater flow that was talked about earlier, and we have that digitized, and we use it to analyze things now. East of well A, so out in this area, we've got a wetland, we've got open water, we got a little bit of row crop. So there is a little bit of row crop out there, but not a huge amount. East of well B, we've got mostly cultivated row crop land, and we have some forest, that green area is a little bit of woodlot there. We also use what's called corn frequency layer, which is an extremely valuable tool for us. It is a kind of a newish tool that we can look at the frequency of corn grown on the landscape. We can go frequency of soybeans if you want to do that, but it really wouldn't tell you anything. For example, if a field has a corn frequency of 7, then it's basically rotated like corn and beans. If it has a frequency of 14, it means it's been continuous corn. So we look at that often. If you look at the corn frequency around well A, it's 7. The colors there are in the reddish range, that's 7. If you look around well B, it is blue, that's 14. There's no rotation in that particular area. I'm kind of setting up big corn here. So well B is higher, 13.8, because of all those factors involved. And it has a limestone geology around the well, which we've found a lot of our highest wells have. And the corn frequency is high, so it's continuous corn. And we believe that just simply rotation could probably bring that well down below 10. It wouldn't take it all the way, but it would definitely reduce the amount of leaching, and over time that would lower that well. Why am I getting so ornery about corn? My brother's a Pioneer seed salesman, so it's very interesting at Christmas time. I just bring up GMOs after the first old fashioned, and then pretty soon we're in the backyard wrestling. And then it all simmer down, and I'll throw another one in there just because I'm a little bit like that. this is a graph of the nitrogen use of all the different crops, and corn is the king for nitrogen use. Potatoes probably lose more nitrate from the root zone because potatoes are a little shallower. Corn is an excellent crop for going down after nitrogen. It's just that the amounts that are put on is so much greater than most crops that some is lost. And it also is a warm season crop, and so we don't utilize the season very well with corn. And so it tends not to utilize the cool weather times like wheat would, for example. And this is a graph that he put in here about, you know, of all the factors, whether it's rooting depth or nitrogen applied, corn is just below potatoes as far as nitrogen rates and loss of nitrogen. And we have just under 100,000 acres of corn, which is a large increase. Over the past 10 years or so, we've gained 15,000 acres of corn. As these small dairies and stuff go out, people just go into row crop and they rent their land out. Some of the work that we've done to try to make sense of this, no matter what we do, it will be a little bit of a shotgun approach as far as it'll look like a little bit random to you, because remember, we're dealing with a three-dimensional aquifer down below the soil. And so this is basically looking at corn frequency that I discussed a little bit earlier, and nitrate concentration. So as the amount of corn around the well goes up, so does the nitrate. So some of that work. Also found our highest nitrates tended to be in the limestone aquifer. And I have a graph of that, or a figure I can show and discuss a little bit better later. But this is a little unfair because we have more wells under limestone than we have under any other type. The Prairie Duchesne aquifer is the biggest aquifer here. There's good relationships with the wells that have these either sand or gravel or limestone, upper geology with corn frequency. So we have been able to explain some of these situations with corn. And this is what I was going to talk about. If you consider this to be the top of the Prairie Duchesne layer for this diagram, this hypothetical situation, what we have found is a lot of folks have put their wells just into that layer. And those are where we find the highest nitrate wells. If people go a little deeper, they tend to get into it's less influence from the area around it. And that's why we'll sometimes find some of the highest wells amidst one that's lower, quite a bit lower. And we look at the well depth and see how long it's cased, and usually it went a little deeper and got into a different layer. Another thing that Adam is very involved in is doing these nitrate screening clinics. And we do those 4 to 5 times a year. We encourage everyone to come. We talk to people about their samples. We do their samples right on site. And it has built a lot of good relationships, and we've built a lot of good data. When I first got here, I was told, do not collect any addresses and don't even look people in the eye and, have them pass their sample through a little, hole in the wall or some damn thing. And I'm like, why are we doing this? Everybody I've talked to in the county wants clean water, whether they're a farmer or whether they're a rural person, whatever. What is your name and your address? Do you want us to put it in the database or not? And they do. Most everyone does. And so now we've got these wells are being added to our network as we collect them. We keep a separate database. This is just from this year. We've collected, these are the ones of people that gave us the addresses, and it's basically adds to the database, and we've done about 1,600 samples in the last 4 years. And lo and behold, 12 to 13% are over 10, basically the same as some of the other. And it leads to good discussions with individuals about other issues, treatment, what's going on around their neighborhood, those kinds of things. So it's been a good practice. I I could take questions on nitrates, or I could go into my other talk and leave a little bit more time at the end of that, depending on what you would want to do. I have to switch the slides anyway, so I guess I could probably try to do that and answer questions over my shoulder. If there is one, here, you.
Anybody got a question for Tim? I see one over here.
I was just going to ask, your slides refer to nitrogen-nitrates. What is actually being measured and where is the source? You're measuring both nitrogen and nitrates? And like if you put ammonia on your field, does it ever become nitrate for your?
That's a good question. Nitrate, we measure nitrate as nitrogen. So nitrate as an ion is rarely reported, but it would be about 4 times higher if you reported your results that way. The standard is 10 parts per million of nitrate nitrogen. So if you put ammonium on your field, urea, manure, whatever, there is a good population in all of our field soils that try to convert that to nitrate. And in cold soils, it's a lot slower. What has been found and documented is that in those continuous cornfields, the nitrification process happens faster and faster. After about 5 or 6 years of continuous corn, the nitrification bacteria dominate and really convert fertilizer to nitrate faster than a soil where there's rotation. I found that pretty fascinating. Somebody did some work on that.
So what is the source for your funding for your nitrate clinics?
That is the county. I was going to talk about that in a little bit here. That's what I'm going to talk about now is all of this work that we've done has been county supported. Yeah.
Are there upcoming clinics?
Yeah, we'll put them on the website in January and I'll line them up for the whole year.
Anybody else with a burning question?
I don't know how burning it is, but I remember Kim said at the Hop and Barrel talk something about 40% of corn is used for ethanol. Is that?
Dr. John Eichert.
Is that true?
That is true.
So I always thought it was going to CAFO animals, but it's not. It's going for ethanol production.
No. Corn on the landscape really increased because of that. They mandated ethanol and fuels, and we have more corn. Yeah.
You ready to go on?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So what I'm going to talk about next, real fun stuff, is more work, kind of more structured part, but basically I wanted to report, because I want the public to know that we have made progress. Back in the day when that recommendations were developed, and I'll go through some of that, why and how that was developed, the county had to put up or shut up. The public was mad about issues, and they did put it up. And I will show you what they did. That was my attempt to make like a newspaper article, back in the day when you got newspapers. So back in December of 2016, there was, and I'll get into some of this, there was a spill, the public was angry, and the Board of Supervisors at the time appointed a study group. And it was, a study group being appointed is like big news, I don't think it's ever happened in all the years I've been at different counties, but they did. They appointed a study group, and it had some board members on it, but it had 6 citizen members. I don't recall any of their names because I wasn't here. But they were, I do remember, they were people of learning, and they had some good knowledge of these issues. That large manure spill that had happened at Emerald Sky was the precipitating event to get people motivated, but there was a lot more to it than that. Oh, look at that.
There you
I was
go.
wondering where that thing went. If that manure spill would have happened, and I'm telling you, manure spills like that happen somewhere in the United States and somewhere in Wisconsin every year. They do happen. It's not perfect. But if nobody says anything and nobody takes it to heart, nothing happens, right? In this case, citizens, I wasn't here, but I was told they attended meetings. You know, they said, hey, what are you going to do? And since no one really can, how do you solve these big problems? No one can say how to do it because it's pretty complicated. They appointed that study group as a result of those citizens, I believe. There's other things going on too. We had brown water events going on in that area quite frequently prior 10 years. We had all those results, remember I told you about, that had been collecting all that data for 10 or 15 years prior to this, that had been like, what are you going to do with this data? It's showing all this wells over 10. And so all of those things, there's more. Every county's got their little skeletons in the closet. We got them. We've got Superfund sites. We've got about 5 of them. We've got areas with atrazine prohibition areas that were declared because of that problem. We have all these tanks. Remember all the gas stations that were all over everywhere? We've got our share of those. We've got that deep well casing area out there by Hudson that's still a bit of a problem area. All of these things, plus what I had mentioned, plus 3/4 of our county is in an area that supposedly we're supposed to be trying to reduce phosphorus loss from that area into Lake St. Croix. That all happened prior to that big event. And people, I think, just decided, hey, when are we going to start to do something with all these things that are happening? When they did this TMDL, our contribution load to the lake is 133,000 pounds of phosphorus every year. And we were being asked to cut that by 49,000 pounds. I mean, we work pretty hard, but we might reduce like 2,000 pounds a year at our department. So it's like, how are we going to do this? So that's why the study group was formed. We have all these things coming together, and the citizenry of the county care about water. And so they gave us a overarching goal of, protection, and they met twice a month. They had a lot of experts. They collected hundreds of pages of information that I have leafed through a few times. Came up with recommendations. One was to start that baseline trend data. They wanted to identify these environmental sensitive areas. They wanted us to do that outreach, those clinics. They wanted us to increase nutrient management plans, acres. They wanted us to evaluate the ordinances in place. They wanted us to explore options to regulate livestock operations. And they wanted us to establish a water quality committee to ensure that we didn't just go back to doing whatever we were doing before and forget about it. So there was a lot of those are some pretty difficult recommendations to try to implement. I know I was sweating pretty good when I read it, and I'd just been hired. And I want you to embrace why this is so important. I see these kind of big plans from the feds, and I see it from the state once in a while, and you don't see these kind of detailed, objective-driven, goal-driven items developed at the local level very much. You will see these kind of things in our land and water resource management plan, but that's just 5 people sitting in Baldwin working on land and water. That's not the whole county. This was put together by local, adopted by supervisors. It was driven by leadership, and they committed to funding not only a position that I oversee, as well as all the sampling that I've showed you has been funded by the county. So they have made a pretty good effort, and we rolled that into our land and water resource management plan in 2018. So all of my staff are actively working on this to try to do something. The first priority was this baseline data. We knew we needed time because you have to collect samples from the same wells over and over again, and we needed at least 5 to 10 years to get a good result. And I knew what happens politically. People go on to other things, and pretty soon they're like, defund you or whatever, and you're like, well, I'm waiting for my long-term results. And so I didn't leave that open. I looked for wells, and we found 2 networks that we could use to get trend data before, right away, so we could say, hey, this is what's going on in St. Croix County. One well network is a transient non-community well, municipal wells that have to be sampled once a year as a minimum. And another one are legacy well results. Those are people that we extracted from that database of all those people that have been bringing well samples to the county. There was a bunch of people in there that had done it multiple times. So we were able to look at those. The TNC database is great because they do it every year at the same time. The problem is it's not very good distribution to describe the whole county. But it does have, this is 165 wells that we were able to look at, and we ran statistics on every one that had the data. And we learned some things. Top graph was, all over the map, and that's no trend. We had 65 wells that didn't have any trend at all, 39% of the total. 31% of the wells, 50 of them, were increasing in nitrate over 17 years that we measured or had data for. Some had no change. Basically, the average is no change, but it does go up and down, but there wasn't any change statistically, so that was 18%. And believe it or not, 12% were going down, and that was so interesting to me that I looked into every single one of those. Usually it was areas that used to be intensively farmed and now were in subdivision. Well, because if you're 10, 12 parts per million, you're still going to have nitrates because you're going to replace that with some septic, but the level is going to go down quite a bit. And then the legacy wells, those are the people that came into the program. We had about 16% increasing, about 9% decreasing. And about 75% of them weren't changing. So there are increasing trends in the county that are substantiated by that initial work that we did. I have no idea what I just did. Yeah, I went way, way into the future. Okay. So the big picture, kind of hard on corn. I feel bad for my brother. But if you take and do some simple math, if you look at corn, about 32 pounds an acre are leached from corn on average. You could get more, you get less, but that's the average number by University of Wisconsin. That's about 3.2 million pounds a year in St. Croix County are leached from corn. Septic systems, we have about 17,700 septic systems and 20 pounds per each average. That's about 354,000 pounds of nitrogen. So magnitude-wise, it's important, but it can't shake a stick at the corn. Manure is a little bit of an intangible there because at our animal units, including all the horses, pigs, fowl, everything, and I'm a little bit doubtful of some of the numbers because they're very general in the ag statistics page. If you calculate out the manure related to 38,000 animal units, it's about 8.3 million pounds of nitrogen in that manure that's produced annually, and most of that is in organic form, and then how it's handled and where it's applied is all critical. It also is very vulnerable to losses to the air if it's stored improperly, and applied to the surface of the soil versus incorporated. And so it's very difficult, but there's a lot of nitrogen being moved around in manure that has to be considered in this equation. Another thing that people don't generally think about is soil organic matter itself. So soil has organic matter, and tillage of that soil not only causes that soil to be exposed to the surface and vulnerable to surface erosion, it also causes that soil to drop in organic matter if tillage is done every single year without fail. And that has happened for many, many years. And just no-till and minimum till has only really came on, in the last 15, 20 years is really becoming a little bit more accepted and expanding. If you take a 3% organic matter soil and drop it to 2% over time due to tillage over 50 years, that would release 2,100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So that's a heck of a factor too. Some of the nitrate that we're seeing in the groundwater in some areas might be from that fact of tillage for that many years on the landscape. So that's where you'll get that background is never going to go down below 1 or 2 because of that is always there. And remember, we have 150,000 acres of row crop land. If that has occurred on that large of a scale, those are some of the things that you have to consider. Second priority was to map these sensitive areas. I thought we could just make the map St. Croix County and then just move on to priority number 3. But we couldn't do that because they had some specific things in the plan. We wanted to look at sinkholes and some other things, and I've got graphs of that. That's a sinkhole. We get some, that's an actual person standing there. They look like an ant probably to you guys, but they're standing next to a hole the size of a house. One of the ways that we've been looking at the nitrates is by township, and the reason we're doing that a lot, it matches up with but is additive to the work that they're doing at UW-Stevens Point, where if you send your sample into UW-Stevens Point, you will contribute to a township scale mapping program that is done on all the counties in the whole state. However, you could send in 5 samples and now you've just, you've influenced those results in a little bit because you've had one person who's got a high sample keep sending in samples. So we've excluded duplicates and we've been doing township scale mapping from all sources from our wells that we've been measuring, and we have 6 towns that exceed what's called the Tier 1 standard. So 10% or more of the wells are over 10 parts per million and they average more than 5.4. This was a standard that was proposed a few years ago as being the tier that you would then be regulated and you would have to develop a management plan for that town. That disappeared into the marble halls of Madison, and then COVID hit and I've never heard of it since. Groundwater susceptible areas, you've seen that map. It's most of our county. We have big sinkholes that happen. Our bedrock isn't as shallow as some of the other areas of the state, but it's still there. We did a massive LIDAR and topography mapping coupled with aerial imagery. It was a computer exercise from the University of Minnesota that analyzed our county and came up with possible sinkholes throughout our whole county, like 500 of them. We went out and looked at any of them that we had access to, meaning we had a contract with the landowner to do nutrient management, and we found a bunch of those with the red. So we were able to indicate to the landowners they had to modify their nutrient management plan to avoid those areas with manure and fertilizer. We haven't gotten to all 500 of these, but we do go out on sinkholes, and when we verify them, we add them to this database. And then we consider those in anything like a nutrient management plan or with a land use application. Also did some modeling with a program called Drastic, and all this is shows that 10 part per million wells are not equally distributed in our county. There are certain areas of the county that are way more likely to have high nitrates. We also did surface water modeling and a program called eval. This is just one of the sub-watersheds of the Kinney, and it shows the red fields are more likely to lose surface water, and so we can target those lands with BMPs. Our third priority was coordination, so they funded a position to coordinate this work, and we've had that position filled since 2019. We had a couple of other tasks, such as creating an urgent response plan, conducting these clinics, and doing some other work. We adopted a plan in 2021, and we track complaints and follow up on them in a systematic way. And only 5 to 8 of those are related to manure every year. And we have a protocol to follow up on those. And if we feel it's a spill that is going to impact residents, we do mailings to those people or visits to them to try to notify them they need to test their water for bacteria. And then we do those water screening clinics that we talked about. We haven't developed a rapid response bacteria protocol yet. We have not figured out what we would actually do with that. I did take this same data from the UWSP well water viewer. I encourage you to actually look at that online. It's extremely interesting. This is St. Croix County's coliform bacteria test results. So basically we have 4 towns, Stanton, Forest, Oberle, and Katy, that have had a significant amount of coliform bacteria, and then what's usually done is E. coli is tested as a secondary test. And of that, only 2 out of 16 wells in Stanton and 6 in Oberle tested positive for E. coli, which is definitely a much more serious concern. And we have not figured out how to get a handle on the bacteria as far as relating it to things. The biggest thing we've related to is usually geology features and well construction as far as vulnerability. And then increased nutrient management plan acres, and we were able to do that, although it's starting to slip away as we take lands out of agriculture and put them in homes at an extremely rapid pace, and solar farms and other things. When that happens, we don't work with them. They go into a different category. So we are losing agriculture a little bit in our county because it's very rapidly developing. So the number of people that want to get into a long-term management plan goes down when you have that environment. And you can't blame them. They're not thinking of 30 years out. Last few priorities before I get to the questions. We had also were asked to revise county land use policies and ordinance to protect groundwater. And we did that. We did a bunch of that. We have more to do. Chapter 15, zoning, we did that in 2019. We did the shoreline ordinance in 2020 and floodplain in 2022. And some of the changes in that process made it more focused on water quality and just generally better ordinances. Our planning team worked very hard on all of those, and we were able to accomplish that. We don't have a ordinance that, if amended or revised, would solve some of the problems that I talked about today. Some of that is because agriculture has an extremely effective lobby at the state level. So counties are not allowed to do certain things as far as standards, etc. So we can't pass a standard that basically excludes farming, so the right to farm laws come into play. And so efforts to do that, or number 6, have led to court cases that we'll hear about some of those. And so I think that's what's kept us out of that area of work, and we have not made much progress on that. And priority 7 is something that we are currently, kicking ideas around.
We can't see the priorities, Tim. Would you read those?
Oh, priority 5 is revise county land use policy and ordinances to protect groundwater resources. And then priority 6 is explore options regarding regulation of livestock operations for the purpose of protecting groundwater resources. And 7 is establish water quality committee to ensure that ground and surface water protection continues to be a priority. On 7, we have talked about it. I know Dan is in support of it. Dan's a supervisor in the back there to ask a question. We want to do it in a way that is not probably going to be like an official committee where we essentially spend most of our time developing agendas and developing minutes and developing all of those things. We'd rather have it be more of an open group that works on solutions. So we're still working on figuring out how that gets implemented. So our groundwater future, you might, from what I presented, you might think it's really bleak, And some of the municipal wells are increasing in nitrate, by the way. So it's like, what is the future? You saw this chart where I talked about how much we're exposed to nitrate, and it's quite amazing amount. I put together a graph from some tables from the University of Wisconsin, Kevin Massar. We get about 8 inches of deep perk, average numbers from the different soils that we have in our county. That's the orange line there. So you can use this to try to say, well, how much do I have to cut? How much do I have to get? How much leaching do I have to stop in order to get my well to be clean in my area? So if you take a 10 part per million well, it's about 20 pounds of nitrogen leached on average into your area, the well shed area that we were talking about earlier. If there's a lot more leaching or a lot more water percolation, then it's a lot higher amount. So what this table shows is that, and we have wells that are way out here, right? They're getting a lot of nitrogen leaching, a lot. But even that's 50 pounds per acre per year. That's a lot of nitrogen being lost into the groundwater. Is that, I'm saying if we've got the average of the county is only 5, that's only 10 pounds per year. If we can cut 10 to 20 pounds per year, we can bring a lot of our wells into a lot cleaner shape. And we have practices that we're promoting that Tara talked about and others. These practices will reduce those amounts. We just need broader adoption, a little bit of a first efficiency of nitrogen, better manure spreading practices, and crop rotation can get those changes if done on a big enough scale. Reducing the impact, we have seen excellent treatment, a lot more affordable, and people are installing those. And we'll hear about ARPA funds that are being utilized now too. Is surface water as bad as we think it is? We have some bad surface water problems. We have phosphorus in the whole St. Croix and other areas. Phosphorus is our #1 problem. Polk County is the #1 contributor of phosphorus to the Lake St. Croix, but we're following right behind with #2. We were asked to reduce almost 50,000 pounds to meet the TMDL. We were able to since 2012, we were able to reduce to 38,700 pounds of phosphorus, and we believe we'll meet the TMDL by 2027. And if you look at the monitoring that's being done in the St. Croix, which is monitored pretty effectively at Stillwater and Prescott, it is better, but it still needs a little ways to go. So we're one county out of 18 that contributes to Lake St. Croix. So I'm part of a grant process to try to work with the other counties to encourage them to focus on phosphorus reduction. And that's all I have today. That's what the county program has done. We're just one entity out of, there's the feds, there's state, there's local, like producer-led. There's a lot of people working on this to improve it. There are problems and, but there are people working to fix it. Questions?
You're gonna give me this?
Oh, God, yeah, I can't give you that.
All right, so Lisa can come up and get your presentation ready, and if you got a question or two, and take a break, quick break too, we're trying to catch up on some time. So, who's got some questions here?
My question has to do with, for your legacy wells, how did you develop a sampling plan for them? Did you do any short-term variability so that you know that this is the right time of the year to do it, to get an average number? Because it's going to vary depending on the temperature, the snow cover, the runoff.
The legacy wells, we did not try to filter them. That was all historical data that we had from the 1999 to 2018. We collected samples. What we did do to figure out when to sample, we did a 2-year study and we sampled it by month. And we found out that the early fall, about right now, is the most stable, conservative time to sample. If it's over 10 now, it's gonna be over 10 in the springtime for sure.
All right, folks, if you don't sit down, I'm gonna do my Pat Benatar. I'm gonna hit you with your best shot. I'll just go ahead and start. All right, does anyone else want the microphone? You can do this section instead of me.
I have one thing to announce. What we didn't hear earlier is that Lisa Doerr has won the Midwest Environmental Advocates Bill Irwin's Environmental Justice Award this year.
Thank you.
And congratulate her for that. Thank you, Lisa, for being here today, and for Ron. And we'll turn the show back to you.
All right, and should I still go about 20 minutes?
Whatever you can do.
Okay. So thanks so much. This is an incredible turnout here today, and I really feel like we should give a hand to Kim and her whole folks, the Emerald Protecting the Water folks. They are keep going, and great event here today, and I think they should probably take it on the road. So my name is Lisa Doerr, and I live in Polk County, specifically in Laketown, the town of Laketown. And I'm going to be talking today about a partnership of 6 townships that got together to try to look at the issue of large livestock. And my husband and I are both in Laketown, and we do a commercial hay operation in Laketown that has really looked at, I know a lot of what you talked about is corn and beans, and we don't have any corn or beans. But we have alfalfa and a variety of grasses, and in the drought, it's been really wonderful to see what a miracle crop that alfalfa is with those deep roots and really surviving the drought. This is a map of the 6 towns that originally came together to form what was known as the Town Partnership Group. The county line is Polk and Burnett County, so one of the towns, Trade Lake, is in Burnett County. The other 5 are in Polk County: Bone Lake, Luck, Laketown, Sterling, and Eureka. And those 6 towns came together. And the reason that they came together was because in 2019, word got out that there was a big interest in developing large swine factories in our area. And there's actually an attempt to go around and talk to landowners in both Polk County and Burnett County to look at moving in specifically sow operation. The herds in Iowa and Minnesota are having a lot of problems with viruses, the PRRS virus in particular. They've been advised by both the Minnesota and the Iowa universities to get the sows out of the hog belt, try to move them to cleaner areas, because if you lose an entire set of sows, you're losing your breeding stock, and you really have a long-term impact on your financial operations. So a group called Suday, which is a big vet clinic that runs in southern Minnesota and Iowa, formed a shell corporation called Cumberland, and we're looking to buy land in our area. And they have now applied to the DNR for a 6,200 animal unit sow operation that would be about 26,000 pigs. So that really got people to notice that something was going on. Both of our counties passed moratoriums, our towns passed moratoriums, so they had time to really take a look at this issue and get their arms around a very complex set of information. Eventually, the counties both passed very weak ordinances that really did not protect public health or property values. So we looked at getting the towns together. We put 6 towns together who came together, and I'll talk about what we did. 5 of those towns passed an ordinance, and then the state chamber sued the town I live in, the town of Laketown, and eventually there was an election that was lost. The people who supported the ordinance were beaten, and so the new Laketown town supervisors came in and rescinded the ordinance. So we now have 4 towns that have this ordinance in place. Go ahead. So it's kind of interesting to look at our committee. We put together a town partnership committee. It was made up of 6 people. 3 of them were town board chairs. 1 of them was a supervisor, and then there were 2 residents, myself being one of the residents from Laketown, and the other one, Dan Winterhalter from Eureka. And I chaired that process. So I just point this out because we had great buy-in from our town chairs, really good leadership, and smart folks who really wanted to take a look at the issue. The concerns that really came up and drove the process, the biggest one being that the state regulations do not address most of the concerns that people have. And if you go to the DNR website, you can see this on the CAFO page. They make it very clear that the permitting that the state does only applies to water quality protection. It doesn't address air issues, odor, economic, all the other issues that are involved in this very complex system. And particularly, even that system of permitting pollution from manure is very weak enforcement. It's politically driven. There can be no enforcement at all for years on end. In our county, in our area, when we started the process, 5 of our 6 CAFOs were operating on expired permits. And of course, we live right next door to Emerald Skies, so we'd watch that for years too. So there's a lot of concerns that not only is it a weak system, but it's very poorly enforced. And then finally is this push for within the industry to work as an extraterritorial, the whole industry wants to work outside of any legal status, that they really view themselves as they should not have to have any laws regulating them at all, that the view is kind of like in New York, where all the diplomats who are part of the United Nations, they can park anywhere they want because they're outside of the law. And that the whole idea of this industry is that they should be outside of the law. And you really see that with the illegal workforce. 75% of the workers in the dairy CAFOs are undocumented, that the water pollution, the road damage, and all these other issues that are really outside of the local people's ability to establish any kind of legal oversight. So go ahead. So we set up some goals. The first goal was to try to protect the towns, 250 square miles, about 6,000 people, and about 2/3 of $1 billion worth of real estate, to protect the health and the property values of those folks. But the real crux of the matter was to try to share expertise and share the resources, because it is so complex and it's such a big industry pushing back on our towns. We had people telling our county supervisors that it was a felony offense to extend the moratoriums, do all kinds of things like that. So we really needed to come together and try to figure the issue out. We looked at trying to complete the research and the legal work that we needed to pass a strong ordinance, and we budgeted that we thought it would be about $18,000 to do the work. We ended up getting a lot of great pro bono support, and we ended up at about $4,500, and most of that was legal fees. So each town put in less than $800. So we came up with this model for an operations ordinance, and I'll explain in more detail what an operations ordinance is, but it looks at the operations of the plant, not the siting of the plant, not the water quality, all these other issues, but how does the plant operate? And the whole basis of the ordinance is based on research, and we came up with a lot of research that are compiled in appendices to the ordinance. Then we also pulled from that research a series of findings of facts for the local town itself and findings of fact for the CAFO industry generally. So we have two very valuable sources of information that we compiled. From those findings of facts, we put together an application process with a fee, and the key to the application process is that the permittee would do a series of plans that would tell the town how you're going to operate this plant. They tell the town, we're going to operate the plant this way, and then the town can hold them to those plans. And then there are a couple of specific conditions, but most of the heart and soul of the ordinance is the plans that the operator itself does to get a permit. Go ahead. So there's really three parts to the ordinance. The first part is 114 findings of facts. It's fascinating reading. It's really has paragraphs that pull findings out of the research itself and also contain a lot of hot links back to the source of that research. We have 19 findings of fact that apply to a locality, and then we have 95 findings that apply specifically to the general industry itself. Then the second part of the ordinance is Appendix A, and that's got 199 references in it that reference back to scientific journals, university programs, looks at the regulatory and court documents that are the basis of our work, and also looks at more recent media articles, because a lot of times the media will be covering issues that the researchers haven't gotten to yet. And we are looking at annotating Appendix A because, of course, there's new stuff coming out all the time. Then Appendix B has 9 maps. I'll show you a little sample of those that take local information and put it into a map form, a more graphic form, because a lot of people's brains don't work with numbers. So we put Appendix B into a visual format. I want to talk a little bit, what is an operations ordinance? An operations ordinance is not a ban. We are not banning large livestock facilities in any of these towns. It's not a siting ordinance. We are not building on the state's deeply flawed siting ordinance. It is an operations ordinance. We are looking at permitting people to operate in our town. They tell us how they're going to operate. We hold them to it. And the plans that they put in place to operate their facilities are really designed to protect public health, water, air quality, and property values. So not only the environmental impact, but the economic impact. I'm not going to read all these. They're too little for you to see anyway. But getting to how the ordinance is actually put together, we start out with the whereas section, which is not the whereas section, but the whereas section. What is the foundation that this town or this local unit of government is building their ordinance on? This talks about, I'm going to be showing you data from the Bone Lake Township. So this talks about what Bone Lake's done. They had a moratorium. They signed an intergovernmental agreement to work with other towns. They went through a research process. They looked at scientific data. And because of all that work, they are going to lay out the following findings of facts and declare a support for an ordinance. So each town is different. Some towns don't do moratoriums, some towns do, some towns work together, some towns don't. So the first foundation of your ordinance in any locality is going to be different. Then we got into the local findings of fact, and for the town of Bone Lake, we had 19 findings of fact. Just a quick look at a couple of them. Everyone in town, in this town, and most towns in Wisconsin, relies on a private well for their water. Not just for their children, but also for their animals also. Some of them test their water, but there's no scientifically put together system in the town, in the county, or in the state to really tell you what's going on with water quality. The entire Bone Lake town is in the St. Croix watershed, and St. Croix watershed has got the big impaired Lake St. Croix. Both of their big lakes are impaired. And then we took a look at the property values. There's about $104 million worth of property in this town, and 30% of it is in land, and then the rest of it is in houses and buildings. So that, then we took that data and tried to make graphs of it so people could see it. And if you want to take a look at the ordinance, we also have links to where the data came from to show you the methodology for making the maps. So this, the green here is forests. So the town of Bone Lake is highly forested. The yellow is agricultural land, and the blues are water. So you can see Bone Lake is a big forested town. This is a susceptibility to groundwater map. I think you referenced it, or someone did, this susceptibility to groundwater. This is a methodology that the DNR has put together that looks at a variety of functions and really lays out susceptibility issues. It's actually I believe it's 5 factors. So this dark section here is highly susceptible to groundwater pollution. The orange is moderate, and then this kind of light brown is less moderate, but there's nowhere in Bone Lake that has a low susceptibility to groundwater contamination. Then we matched that up with the depth to groundwater, which you definitely mentioned, our guest did. And the pink is 0 to 20 feet of groundwater. The blue is 20 to 50, and then the green is over 50. So you get a nice graphic representation. And when people look at this in a town, they know right where their farm is. So it's pretty easy to see. Go ahead. Our town, Bone Lake, Lake Town, our whole area is full of lakes. And the county is in the shoreland, under the shoreline regs. So this gives you a map of the areas that the county does have control over zoning. And then this is a manure absorption ability map that's kind of interesting. The red is very limited ability to absorb manure. The gray is not rated, and then green is not limited. So as you can see, almost nothing in the township is, or almost the whole township has a limited ability. That's a nice graphic representation. The last area that we looked at is the economic impact. The data is pretty clear that large CAFOs and air emissions particularly have a big impact on economics. So people wanted to know what is the value of our property. So we dropped random pins in the town, and then took a look at how much the property was worth within a half mile of that random drop. And in this town, it's anywhere from 2.6 million down to 200,000. So if you have a 10% drop in an area with 2.6 million, you've lost $260,000 worth of value. Give people a feel for how much it is. Then we did that again for 1 mile radius, and then you start to really get a feel. The data shows, like especially with the hog CAFOs, that they can impact up to 3 miles, pretty, even sometimes up to 6 miles. But we did the 1 mile here, and then you end up with property values from 20 million to 8 million down to maybe 1 million. So real good graphic representations of our findings of fact. So then we moved on to trying to take a look at the CAFO industry itself and do some kind of graphic representation of this industry. It's really built on our community's air and water and our property values. I mean, that's where the wealth of our nation comes from. That's where this entire industry is built on. And then all of these are somewhat fluid. But basically, what happens is they come in with contract growers. Now, this may not be as common with dairy, but very common with the hog world and the chicken broiler world. The big processors come in, contract with growers, and that's what we were seeing in Burnett County, that they wanted to set up a contract grower operation. Then one area that people don't seem to know much about is this whole world of veterinarians, equipment producers, and financiers that really drive the industry. And we'll see that with the Chamber of Commerce intervening on the work that we're trying to do, that they're really representing some of the big people who outfit these giant factories and also who finance them. In Burnett County, it's actually a veterinarian clinic that's looking at setting up and building the factory that's been proposed there. And then we have the integrators, which is kind of an obscure group of people, but very important. They kind of put the whole thing together. They'll work with the processor to set the contracts up with the contract growers. They sometimes they're vets, sometimes they're finance people, sometimes they're just integrators. And you really see that a lot in North Carolina, where there's a lot of hog factories. And then really what drives the whole thing are the giant corporate processors. And you know, in Polk County, we have 5 or 6 family-owned livestock processors. But if our whole area goes over to producing for these corporate processors, that's where it all goes. So that capital coming out of the big corporate processors drives a lot of the system. From our research that we did, we put together 95 findings of fact about the CAFO industry. We linked them all back to specific articles, and we do a whole bunch of areas that we cover, trying to look at this industry as a whole, not just at manure, not just at air, the way the DNR looks at everything. You know, the DNR has to look at things under the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. We try to look at it as a whole because that's what it really is. So we're looking at public health impact, waste. An area that's really left out is animal population and depopulation, biosecurity. There's a dairy CAFO in Texas in April that burned up and killed about 18,000 cows, and there was no plan for what would happen to those carcasses once those cows had died. And actually that's not even required anywhere to do that. So we're asking them to tell us, if you have an avian flu outbreak in your chicken factory, where are all those chickens going to go ahead of time? We're looking at air emissions and the impact on wells. And then what we're asking for is a compliance enforcement plan. So how will you put a plan together to make sure that you comply with the plans that you're giving the town? And how will you monitor that? Go ahead. So I'm just going to take a couple more minutes to get a little down nitty-gritty about what the ordinance does. Section 1 establishes our authority. And this has already come up today a little bit in terms of the Wisconsin Constitution. We believe that there is a right in the Constitution to protect water. But there's also other things that are too complicated for a non-lawyer to talk about today. The other thing is Statute 9215, which is the Water Quality Protection Statute. And then the really important part of local control. And this is what drove a lot of the supervisors and chairs that I worked with, is they have local control. They have local responsibility. They have local responsibility to protect their public health and the safety of the people who elected them. And they really took that seriously, and I found that really inspiring and didn't really understand how important that was in Wisconsin, that these towns have village powers, not only to protect the public, but also to regulate noxious, offensive, or unwholesome business. I'm not sure what unwholesome business is. I'll drink some water. You guys can think about that. Section 3 of the ordinance defines a CAFO as 700 or more animal units. And the definition of a CAFO is an arbitrary number, depending on who you are and what you think. Under the Clean Air Act and under the Wisconsin rules, a CAFO is 1,000 animal units, but our towns chose to go to 700. Trade Lake, one of the towns went down to 500. And then they also defined as a CAFO any facility that was coming into their town and dumping manure. Go ahead, honey. So the existing livestock facilities, most of these towns exempted them unless they grew up to 1,000 animal units. Go ahead. And then we have an application fee of $1 per animal unit, and that helps to cover the cost of processing. And then the application procedure, which is really the heart and soul of this ordinance, actually requires the owners of the factory and the property owner to sign the plans and agree to comply to the plans they submit to us, and that a professional licensed third-party engineer also looks at them and signs off on them. Go ahead. The plans include plans to look at infectious disease, waste management, animal population, biosecurity, transportation, water use. Go ahead. And odor, community economics, the impact that the plant could have on economics, fire, and then 2 plans that look at compliance. So another section that's a big change is the financial security or surety, basically a bond that the operator takes out to ensure that they have the ability to close that down. And I think it's interesting to even look here on these grounds at these buildings here that are collapsing after this hatchery had to leave, because we see places where the factories burn up, or the market conditions are no longer helpful and they have to move. For example, Smithfield Foods is just closing 35 of their CAFOs in Missouri, and no one really knows what's going to happen to those giant buildings or any pollution that they're leaving behind. So under this ordinance, the applicant would have to make sure that they could have enough money to close the place up and decontaminate. And then we do a couple of very specific conditions. Mostly it's the operator telling the town what they're going to do, but we do ask that they do scientifically significant data so that we get baseline data on the human and agricultural wells, and that they have enough land to spread their waste on spreadable acres, not just total acres, and that they have land application agreements. Because in Wisconsin, a CAFO can just grab the plat book, write down names of people, and say, I'm gonna spread manure here, and the DNR is not required to check those. And actually, we saw that happen both in Bayfield and Burnett County. We also asked them to comply with the National Fire Protection Association standards, because these factories are in very rural areas and may not have a permanent water supply, may not even have enough fire trucks to deal with a facility that's got 8,000 or 10,000 animal units in it. Go ahead. We had a team of experts that helped us, a researcher from Wild Rivers Conservancy, a legal person was Nick Vivian, who has done a lot of work in St. Croix, Polk, and Burnett County. We had help from research from Richard Bost, who's a longtime environmental engineer, and then a shady character named Steve Oberle from Taylor County. He slipped out. And then we have a great guy right in our town of Luck who's a professor emeritus from University of California, Davis, who's a longtime specialist on virus. So he was able to help us really analyze the data on the viruses that are plaguing the industry. And then Andy Marshall, who's another lawyer who has done a ton of legal work. So the response that we saw to us from industry was interesting to see, and if you think about doing this, you may have similar things happen. They asked the Department of Agriculture to do a material review of the ordinance. Now, the Ag Department didn't do it. They're not required to do it. If a town wants Department of Ag to review an ordinance, they can ask them to do it, but the law is not written that a business or a lobby group can say, please review this ordinance. And go ahead, honey. And then what we saw happen was that the Chamber of Commerce, the Wisconsin Manufacturers of Commerce, started taking legal action against one of our towns. So in April of 22, they did a notice of claim saying that they were considering taking suit. And they had 3 claimants. 2 of them were farmers in Laketown, and one of them was a clothing optional campground. And that was kind of odd. And then what they wanted us to do was rescind the ordinance because from their perspective, the only law that a local unit of government can use is 9390. And then they did file suit in October of 22, but they did drop the clothing optional campground. They really want us to use the siting law, and I don't have time to go into it today, but I can tell you that it was written by industry for industry. Here's a quote from David Cross, I don't know how to say his name, but he basically says, whereas permitting was previously performed at the local level, Wisconsin now has adopted a streamlined statewide permitting approach. And that's where they want to be at the state level. They don't want to be at the local level. And then he has a brag page where he got interviewed by the Wisconsin State Journal, and he actually says, yeah, we wrote the law. So it's a law written by industry. They have refused to allow any upgrades to the rule writing. It's not a good law for local people. I guess I don't have time to go into the other tactics, but basically we saw candidates run against the ordinance, and in Laketown we lost the election, and they rescinded the ordinance within about a half an hour of taking office, but our other towns are still intact. And in the latest development, we now see them not only contesting local units of government having any control, but they are now challenging whether the DNR has regulatory authority over CAFOs. So this was a suit filed on May 26th by the WMC representing Venture Dairy and Wisconsin Dairy Alliance. And one of the founding members of Venture Dairy is Todd Tulls, who, as you guys know, is Emerald Sky. And so after years of telling us that the local unit of government can't do this because the state's doing it, they're now telling us that the state has no right to do it either. And one of the quotes from Venture Dairy was that many farmers may also choose to be permitted, but it's not required. Go ahead. So just to close out, why does the industry oppose local control? From our perspective, it seems like they don't want any regulation, but if you look at the state government, there's only 33 senators. They only need to control 17 senators. There's only 99 state assembly guys. They only need to control 50 of them. So there's 67 people at the state that are now controlling our air and water. That's a lot easier than the 1,200 towns and 72 counties. So if you look at all of your local folks who are basically us, we're talking about 6,400 people. And that's a big number of people. You've got to convince 3,221 of them to come and turn their back on their local water. So you can see why local control is not viewed favorably. But we believe we've got a really great ordinance and appreciate the time today to talk about it.
All right, who's got questions for Lisa? I see Mr. Oberle in the back. Okay.
Lisa, I want to talk a little bit about local control in the context of those landowner agreements. Because let's say you have a new CAFO trying to move in and they need thousands of acres, which most of them do. And let's say people knew that they could form an agreement if they wanted to. We just had this discussion with DNR and I asked them, okay, I'm a landowner, they want to rent my land. What's to stop me from coming up with an agreement that actually is stronger than the state regulations? In other words, instead of requiring soil sampling on my fields every 4 years, like is in the regulations, what's wrong with me writing up an agreement and saying I want that soil tested every 2 years? And if, by the way, if you get over 50 or 100 parts per million phosphorus, no more spreading. DNR, they couldn't say, well, there's nothing wrong. That's basically what they said. There's nothing wrong with that. Because just as you said, we saw in Taylor County too, these big farms try and move in. They put a bunch of names with acres in their plan. These people may have not even been contacted. So the long story short, if you have somebody trying to move in that needs acres, either say no or do a landowner agreement so that at least you're protected.
How many people thought that was a question?
Well, my question was in the landowner agreements within your ordinance, are there any stipulations?
No, there is not.
That's the real.
Yeah, and it's a real interesting point. The idea of using those landowner agreements as a tool for some kind of very, very local control between the landowner and the operator. Yep.
It's your land, you get to say what goes on it. Okay.
Could you make some comments about, my experiences with towns, the town boards tend to be fairly conservative, not comfortable with confrontation. The thought about going to court would chill any thought about action whatsoever. So could you talk about, if that was your experience in trying to get this started and how you got it started? And secondly, could you talk about what happened with your town where they had a groundswell of getting people out of the office, whereas the other towns did not?
Should I use the mic on that? Yeah. So the first question is working with a variety of conservative or quote liberal. We actually had a really wide range of, from MAGA Republicans to back to the lander kind of hippie types working together. And several of the supervisors who were very conservative, they're the ones who really thought it was their responsibility to protect their land. Another big issue that came up was if this, especially with the hog, if most of the pork is going to China, why would we be risking our land and water and property values for the Communist Party of China? That was a really interesting issue that came up. So you really have to look at each individual politician as a person, and we had a lot of one-on-one conversations, a lot of discussions. We had really brave chairs who came to the front and worked on it, but it was a lot of people came to meetings too, but really it was the political leadership that moved it, because that's the only votes that really count at the ordinance level. But they were definitely very wary of legal action. We got two of the big law firms in Minneapolis, Frederickson, Byron, and Bassford and Remley, who went through their pro bono process and agreed to represent the town of Laketown on a pro bono basis against the lawsuit that the chamber brought against the town. But there was all kinds of threats made about legal action, and we felt that this ordinance is strong and could go all the way to the Supreme Court. So, but yeah, you'll definitely see that type of thing happen. I think that's both questions, isn't it? Yeah.
The second question was, what happened in your town that...
Oh, in our town?
Whereas in the other towns, they're sticking to it.
Right, yeah, so in Laketown, we had a very hard-fought election. The anti-ordinance people had one really good candidate that everyone really highly respects. And I think it was 16 votes, that divided it. Big turnout, a lot of, from my perspective, lies about what the ordinance would do. They were telling people that all farmers would be impacted, that you couldn't make hay after 5 o'clock, you couldn't combine after dark. So there was a lot of misinformation, but there was just a lot of people who felt strongly that, that farming is outside of the realm of legal things and that we shouldn't have an ordinance, and that the state was doing the job and it's not a local thing. So it was a very robust discussion. And there were candidates run in 2 other towns, but they didn't get a majority in those towns. And then in the town of Eureka, it held strong. Town of Trade Lake, Bone Lake, and Luck all held strong. So yeah, it's politics. It was rough and tumble politics, I would say.
Laurie, do you want to go ahead and get set up? Have you got a couple more questions quick for Lisa?
Thank you, Lisa. I just had a question about the misinformation campaign that you said happened, because I've actually been to some counter events where they've told me, well, they said we can't combine after dark and these sorts of things. So could you go into that, if there is any like grain of sand that they built that around, that, or some part of the ordinance that you think that they might have misunderstood or have chosen to misrepresent, that sort of thing?
Well, I really appreciate the Farmers Union stepping, you know, I know there was a lot of misinformation going around. I want to say that the Farmers Union has joined with Clean Wisconsin and environmental advocates to push back on the latest Venture Dairy lawsuit that says that the DNR can't regulate, so the CAFOs at all. So 4 of our towns passed almost exactly the same ordinance. The town of Trade Lake took a different route and put more specific conditions into their ordinance. And one of them was that a CAFO can't spread manure after dark. And so that turned in, no, all farmers can never farm after dark or on weekends. And I think that was a grain of truth that turned into the non-grain of truth. And actually, Trade Lake actually changed the language to make that very clear. I can't remember exactly what the language was. But they actually told the county supervisors that it was a felony to extend a moratorium. I mean, there was all kinds of stuff flying around. And I don't know everything that was going around, but they said that my husband and I had the biggest manure pile in Polk County. And that kind of surprised us. So, but you might be able to tell me better than.
No, that's super helpful to know.
Yeah. One guy said that we wouldn't be able to have pink flamingos in your front yard if that happened. So anyway, yeah, it was politics. It was like New Jersey politics. Anyway, there's a lot of great people worked really hard on it, and we respect the farmers, obviously, as well as the people who are concerned about their water quality, both ways.
Anybody else? Last call. Everybody want to get out of here now?
I love being last, or second to last.
Thank you, Lisa.
This goes on here?
Yeah, you can take your glasses off. Put it on there. There you go.
Before I get started, I just wanted to point out that there is a sign-up sheet going around. Hopefully everybody got it routed to you. If you want to put your name down and check your name that you want to be on an email distribution list. Kim, I'm assuming will use that to stay in touch with people on issues. I want to thank everybody for being here today, and I want you to know that I'm Plan B. Mary Bowe, my coworker, was going to be presenting this morning, and she had an emergency, so I'm Plan B. My name is Laurie Diaby. I work for St. Croix County Public Health, and thank you everyone for being here. I am going to talk a little bit just basic. Now that everyone here knows how important their water is, let's talk a little bit about what the recommendations are for testing your water. So
let me think. I got to figure out how to, it's better for me to sit. So the 3 tests that, based on DNR recommendations, I have some handouts here. I know there's a lot in the back, but before I get too deep into it, this one is nice on the back of it. It kind of shows signs and symptoms of your water and what might be the source of the issue that you see in your water. And then there's one on the ARPA funds that's available for drilling new wells and the criteria for that. That's funding that's available through December of 2024 in Wisconsin, in case you've not heard about that. And then I have on these 3 basic recommended tests, there's a handout on each of those with more information. And then there's a general one if anyone's interested in these handouts. I know there's a lot, but in the back already, but I just wanted to point that out. So bacteria is a test. We learned earlier today that the bacteria test is they're looking both at total coliform as well as E. coli. And the recommendation is that you do that at least once a year. And also if you notice a change in your water, taste, smell, color, or if there's been flooding around your well casing is another good time to do the bacteria coliform test. The nitrate test, we talked a lot about nitrates today. That's recommended that you do it at least once a year and before the well is used by a woman who is or may become pregnant. And then also it says for a new well or one that hasn't been tested in at least 5 years, the recommendation is that you test it twice, 6 months apart for the nitrates. The arsenic is a test that they recommend that everybody do at least once. And if you do have a higher result, that you then test more frequently. Just basic prevention is constructing your well in a safe spot. Keep nitrate sources away from your well. We talked a lot about what the different nitrate sources are. Regularly inspect your well for damage, looking at the well casing, making sure the cap is on secure and the conduit is in snug, and then testing for nitrate every year. And make sure you keep regularly testing. Shallow wells, wells in sand aquifers, dug wells with casings that aren't watertight, or wells with damaged or leaking casings or fittings can be possible sources of contamination for nitrates. The health effects for the nitrates is blue baby syndrome, which is for the pregnant women or that are using, they don't want you to use the water for making formula or feeding to babies. It can cause some reproductive harm, as well as chances of cancer, thyroid issues, or fatigue. This is for nitrates. And then some of this stuff I know is redundant. At the end of the day, you've gotten a lot of information, but when it's less than 10 milligrams per liter, then that's when they say you can use the water for all activities, drinking, brushing teeth, preparing food, hand washing, and bathing. But it's when it's greater than 10, then that's when they don't want you to use it. Women who may become pregnant or who are pregnant, and then for long-term use for cooking, they don't recommend, but you can use it for showering and brushing your teeth and bathing. Public health, I don't know if you guys know where we're located. Tim was talking early, you work out of the government center in Hudson, or he's in Baldwin. Our office is in New Richmond. We're behind Aldi's across from Walmart in New Richmond, but we have water test kits that you can get from our office, as well as they have them at the government center, and they also have them in Baldwin. So, we encourage you to test your water, and if you need a test kit, come see us. And then as far as where to send your water, there's a list the DNR keeps a list of certified labs, but we touched on earlier today, we like to encourage people to use the Stevens Point lab because then that's data that is tracked statewide. And then this is just a little bit more about that well replacement program. I would encourage you, if you're interested in it, to pick up this handout. So we made up some time today.
Anybody have questions for Laurie? Okay.
Try my best.
Hi, Laurie.
Hi.
I was wondering, do you know any funding for water testing? Like, it's expensive to test your well. We just did ours. It was $68 for the test and $30 to overnight the sample. That's $100. And I just was curious if you know of any funding, because when I talked to UW Stevens Point, they told me that Portage County is offering free water sampling. They're doing like the home kit that's $68, and that's free to them. So I'm just curious if you know anything.
Well, a couple things. We do a certain amount of free testing through our office. So if you contacted us, you could learn more about that. But for sure on shipping, we do a lot of shipping of water samples. Tim talked about the TNC program. It's our staff that goes out into the community and is collecting those water samples. So if you happen to bring your sample in on the same day that we're shipping samples out, we can save you on, the cost of shipping. We can include that in the samples that we ship out. But we do a certain amount of free sampling, but we can't do it for everybody. Yeah.
And you're not aware of any grants that...
Well, not right now. We don't have any. I mean...
Or what about the state? Do they have any that could be offered to the county?
Local? I know that they do occasionally, every year, the Environmental Health DHS has a grant, a $10,000 grant that counties or municipalities or locals can write a grant for a special project. But it's pretty competitive, and it's not a grant that we've had. And that in some jurisdictions that receive that grant, that is what they use it for, to offer free testing.
Thank you.
Just, I know that USDA has a program called EQIP, that has another grant program that I know that some counties or institutions have used to write grants to fund water quality testing.
Right. And the other thing I want to circle back to what Tim was saying too is we do the free screening, the nitrate screening clinics in our county. And nitrate, that free screening test, is a good indicator of what might be going on in your water. So if cost is, like holding you back, at least start out with our free nitrate test. It's a great starting point.
All right, any other questions? Oh, we got one back.
Well, because there's so much increase in the numbers of cancer, and they blame nitrate levels, and I wonder how many people in here have had their primary physician ever ask them, do they have municipal water or do they have their own well water? I think it's maybe time that the doctors ask that question, especially if they may be suspecting some cancer with their patient. What's your opinion on that?
I know they do, like on DHS, on a statewide level, they do cancer cluster studies where they do some surveillance of when there's, cancer cases, but it's not something that we do locally or within our office, public health. I do know on the state level, they do look at some of those cancer clusters. But yeah, I don't think we probably all agree. Sometimes people don't think of how important their water is. They're thinking if they get a diagnosis of something, it's not always thought of to go back and think, is it the water?
All right, thank you, Lori. So I have some handouts at the back. I want to give a shout out to my counterparts, Jimmy Graff, Barb Nelson, who helped put this on today, gave me immense amounts of support. So thank you to you ladies. Thank you to Farmers Union, thank you to the Nature Center. And if you guys have more questions for these guys, they'll stick around a little bit, I bet. Maybe a little bit, just a little bit. To get more questions for Lisa. All right, I'll just put a plug in for Master Gardeners. If you want to talk about drought-tolerant plants, doing something different in your yard. You know, there are prairies you can establish, there's rain gardens you can establish, you know, pollinator gardens you can establish, alternate turf. There's other things that you can do to help as a homeowner in this water quality issue, and they're more drought tolerant if they're natives. So, just a little word, to food for thought. So thank you all for coming.
Thanks,
Take
Kim.
some goodies with you. Thank you.